A tremor ran through Lyra Thorne, cold as the obsidian palace stone beneath her bare feet. Her heart thrummed a frantic, uneven rhythm against her ribs, a drumbeat of impending sorrow. She clutched a silken shawl tighter around her, though it offered no warmth against the icy dread that had settled deep within her bones. For 3 nights, the visions had consumed her, each one more chilling than the last, weaving a tapestry of decay and betrayal that threatened to unravel the very foundation of the Wolf Kingdom. Her amethyst eyes, usually deep pools of calm, now burned with an inner fire, reflecting the urgent, terrifying images that still flickered at the edges of her sight. A delicate scar above her left brow throbbed with a dull ache, a physical manifestation of the burden she carried. Lyra moved through the echoing corridors, the scent of beeswax and old stone clinging to the air, each step bringing her closer to the great throne room. She knew King Alaric would be there, burdened by the crown he wore with such natural authority, his dark hair a windswept testament to countless sleepless nights. She pushed open the massive oak doors, their hinges groaning in protest, and the sound seemed to amplify the silence within the vast chamber. King Alaric sat upon his throne, a powerful figure in the royal regalia, his piercing gray eyes fixed on some distant point. Lady Seraphina Sterling, his new fiancée, stood gracefully beside him, her golden hair intricately braided, her emerald eyes watching the king with an almost possessive glint. Her presence alone felt like a chill wind sweeping through the room, though she smiled serenely. Several advisors and guards stood respectfully in attendance, their faces unreadable masks. Lyra's voice, usually soft and melodic, emerged as a desperate whisper, barely audible in the cavernous space. "My king, I bring a warning." Alaric turned his head, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly as he recognized her. A flicker of something passed between them, a ghost of shared history, before his kingly composure reasserted itself. Seraphina's smile remained fixed, but Lyra felt the subtle shift in the air, a prickling sensation of watchful disapproval. "Lyra," King Alaric's deep voice resonated, tinged with a weariness she understood all too well. "You look unwell. What troubles you?" His concern was genuine, but his tone held an edge of royal impatience, a king used to decisive action, not cryptic pronouncements. Lyra took a shaky breath, her fingers locking around the folds of her shawl. She knew if she let go, she might simply shatter. The weight of the vision pressed down on her, a suffocating shroud. "A blight, my king," she managed, her voice trembling now, struggling to find the words that could convey the horror she had witnessed. "A shadow blight grows within these very walls. It coils around your court, poisoning loyal hearts, and seeks to consume your life, your very spirit." Her eyes darted towards Seraphina, who met her gaze with an unnervingly steady calm, her lips still curved in that perfect, unyielding smile. Tears welled in Lyra's eyes, hot and stinging, blurring the magnificent hall into an indistinct haze. She spoke of a gnarled, skeletal tree, its branches like grasping claws, its leaves a sickly, dark green that seemed to absorb all light. "I saw it, Alaric, in the heart of your kingdom. Its roots are already reaching, twisting, strangling the life out of everything you hold dear." She stumbled forward, her pleas growing more urgent, more desperate. "It signals doom, my king, a betrayal from within, a decay that will shatter our people." A collective gasp rippled through the few courtiers present. Lyra could feel their stares, heavy with confusion and suspicion. Seraphina, ever composed, stepped subtly closer to King Alaric, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Her touch seemed to ground him, pulling him back from the edge of whatever sympathy he might have felt for Lyra's distress. "Lyra, please," King Alaric said, his voice firmer now, the earlier flicker of concern replaced by a stern resolve. "These are unsettling words, born from what appears to be a troubled mind. The court is secure. My life is secure." He looked toward his advisors, then back at Lyra, his brow furrowed with what looked like genuine pity, but also a hint of frustration. He had known Lyra for years, respected her unusual gift, yet these prophecies always came cloaked in such raw emotion, such unsettling imagery. He needed facts, not feelings. Lady Seraphina's voice, smooth as polished obsidian, cut through the tense air. My king, perhaps our dear Lyra has simply been overwhelmed by the recent changes. Such visions can tax even the strongest constitution. Her tone was laced with a feigned compassion, a subtle undertone of dismissal that Lyra recognized instantly. Serafina offered Alaric a soft, reassuring squeeze of his arm. She speaks of blight and decay, but I see only the flourishing strength of your reign, the vibrant health of your court. Lyra felt a wave of despair wash over her, a crushing weight of futility. She could see Alaric absorbing Serafina's calm, rational words, letting them soothe his pragmatic nature. His gray eyes, which once held such understanding for Lyra's unique burden, now viewed her tears as a sign of hysteria, her frantic warnings as mere ramblings. She was no longer a prophetess delivering a vital truth. She was a woman consumed by emotion, a source of potential instability. Lyra, you are tired, Alaric stated, his voice now devoid of any lingering tenderness. It was the voice of a king addressing a subject who had overstepped. Your visions have often served this kingdom well, but at times your passion can cloud your judgment. He paused, his gaze softening slightly, a momentary flicker of the man she had known, the man she had loved. Perhaps a period of rest would restore your clarity. The Whispering Gardens offer peace and solitude. The suggestion was not a kindness, it was a sentence, confinement. Lyra's breath hitched in her throat. She tried to speak, but her words caught, tangled in the sudden terror that constricted her chest. The prophecy was real, imminent, and he was dismissing it as madness, pushed into disbelief by the very viper in his court. Serafina stepped forward, her serene mask cracking just enough to reveal a sliver of icy determination. Her voice, though still melodious, now carried a distinct edge of accusation. My king, with all due respect, to speak of shadow blight and internal betrayal at a time when we are preparing for such a joyous union is not merely passion. It is an attempt to sow discord, to undermine trust, and perhaps even to challenge your very authority. She turned her emerald eyes directly on Lyra, and for a fleeting moment, Lyra saw the cold, ruthless calculation within them. These are the words of treason, Lyra Thorne, not prophecy. The accusation hung in the air, thick and heavy, like a shroud. Treason. The word echoed in the vast hall, each syllable a hammer blow against Lyra's spirit. Her heart lurched, a sickening lurch that left her breathless. The courtiers murmured, their eyes shifting nervously between the three figures. Serafina had skillfully twisted Lyra's desperate warning into an attack, using Lyra's own distress, her tears, and her profound emotional state as weapons against her. She painted Lyra as a dangerous, unstable element, rather than a loyal, suffering prophetess. My king, she speaks falsely, Lyra cried out, her voice cracking, her hands reaching out in a desperate, futile gesture toward Alaric. She is the blight. She is the shadow. She stands at your side, but her heart holds only darkness. The words, born of pure, agonizing truth, sounded wild and unhinged to ears unaccustomed to such raw emotion. They sounded precisely like the rantings of someone Serafina had just labeled a traitor. King Alaric's face hardened. He rose from his throne, his powerful frame casting a long shadow across the polished floor. The subtle lines of weariness were gone, replaced by the grim resolve of a ruler whose authority had been publicly challenged. His gray eyes, once warm with a shared past, now held only a cold, kingly judgment. Enough, he commanded, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that silenced all murmurs. Lyra Thorne, you have spoken words of discord and accusation without proof. Your claims are wild, your demeanor distressed. For the stability of the court and for your own well-being, you will be confined. He gestured with a dismissive flick of his hand. Two armored guards, stoic and expressionless, immediately stepped forward. Their gauntlets clanked softly as they approached Lyra, their movements swift and efficient. Lyra felt a chill deeper than any palace stone could convey. This was it, the moment she had foreseen, the moment she had desperately tried to avert. Alaric, no, Lyra pleaded, her voice rising to a raw, desperate shriek. You must listen. They are plotting. They will destroy you, destroy this kingdom. Her eyes, streaming with tears, locked onto his, begging him to see beyond the mask of calm, to remember the truth of her gift. but his gaze remained unyielding, a wall she could not breach. Serafina watched, her smile a thin, triumphant line, her emerald eyes glinting with satisfaction. The guards seized Lyra's arms, their grip firm and unyielding. She struggled, her slender frame no match for their brute strength. The rough metal of their gauntlets dug into her skin, a sharp, unpleasant reality. Her long silver hair, now thoroughly disheveled, whipped around her face as she was turned, forced to walk towards the massive doors. Every step was a battle, every ounce of her spirit screaming against the injustice, against the horrific truth and that was being ignored. "The shadow blight tree will grow, Alaric," she cried, her voice echoing down the long hall, a desperate lament. "It has already taken root. Do not turn your back on the truth." But her pleas fell on deaf ears, swallowed by the vast, cold silence of the obsidian palace. The scent of old stone, which once held the promise of ancient wisdom, now felt heavy with the stench of inevitable doom. Lyra's gaze desperately sought King Alaric's face one last time, a silent plea for him to look, to truly see, but he had already turned his back, his attention seemingly drawn by some whispered words from Serafina. The great oak doors groaned shut behind Lyra, muffling her final heartbroken cries. She was dragged away through the dimly lit corridors, her mind reeling, her body aching, her heart shattering into 1,000 pieces. The Whispering Gardens awaited, a place that had once been her sanctuary, now transformed into her desolate prison. Her urgent warnings for the king's safety echoed unanswered through the silent hall, fading into the oppressive gloom. The scent of damp earth and night-blooming jasmine now felt like a cage around Lyra Thorne. Her fingers traced the rough, cold stone of the garden wall, a physical barrier matching the one that had risen between her and King Alaric. Each gust of wind through the ancient trees whispered his name, a cruel reminder of his disbelief, his turning away. A fresh wave of tears burned her eyes, not just for herself, but for the king she knew was walking towards a hidden precipice. She had seen it, the insidious darkness coiling around him, but her words were dismissed as madness. Now, in the forced quiet of her confinement, the visions grew sharper, more insistent. They crashed over her like icy waves, stealing her breath. She closed her eyes, trying to push them back, but they forced their way through, painting stark, terrifying pictures behind his eyelids. The elegant curve of Lady Serafina's sterling smile twisted into something predatory, revealing teeth like splinters of ice. Emerald eyes, once seeming warm, now held a calculating gleam, utterly devoid of mercy. Lyra felt a chill deeper than the garden's night air, knowing this was the true face of the woman who held Alaric's trust. Images flickered. Serafina, her golden hair a shimmering halo, leaning close to Alaric, her whispered words like poison in his ear. Then, the court itself transformed. Familiar faces, men and women who had served the Wolf Kingdom for generations, seemed to vanish, replaced by strangers with watchful, subservient expressions. Lyra saw Serafina moving through the great hall, her movements fluid and silent, like a shadow weaving itself into the very fabric of the palace. Each vision brought a fresh ache to Lyra's chest, a profound sense of helplessness. She pressed her hands against her temples, fighting the onslaught, but the future refused to be ignored. Meanwhile, within the grand, cold walls of the obsidian palace, Lady Serafina was a whirlwind of gracious efficiency. She moved with an effortless charm, her voice a soothing balm that seemed to calm the king's anxieties. She suggested subtle shifts in staff, new appointments to minor, yet influential positions. "Loyalty, my king," she would say, her hand gently touching his arm, her eyes wide with feigned devotion. "It is paramount for the stability of your reign." Alaric, still reeling from the unsettling scene with Lyra, found solace in Serafina's composed presence. He appreciated her keen understanding of court politics, her unwavering support. One by one, the quiet, wise voices that had once balanced Alaric's decisions began to fade from his inner circle. Lord Eldrin, the seasoned advisor who had served Alaric's father, was dispatched on a lengthy diplomatic mission to the distant northern territories. Lady Eleanor, known for her sharp wit and even sharper political mind, found herself overseeing the royal linen production, far from the king's ear. Serafina offered justifications for each change, each absence, always framed as being for the king's greater good, for the streamlining of his rule. She placed her own distant relatives, her own childhood acquaintances, in key roles, their loyalty unquestioning, their smiles as serene and calculating as her own. King Alaric, burdened by the weight of his crown and the constant demands of his kingdom, began to show the strain. His dark hair, usually impeccably styled, often fell across his brow in a weary cascade. His piercing gray eyes, once bright with authority, now carried a perpetual shadow of fatigue. He spent long hours in council with Seraphina and her new appointees, emerging from the meetings looking more drained than before. The scent of old stone, beeswax, and faint whispers in the palace seemed to grow heavier, pressing down on him. Yet when Seraphina smiled at him, offering a warm spiced wine or a gentle hand on his arm, he felt a momentary lifting of the burden. She made him feel understood, cherished, even as she systematically dismantled his support. Sir Gareth, loyal to the very marrow of his bones, watched these changes unfold with a growing, gnawing unease. He stood sentinel by the king's chambers, his broad shoulders squared, his gaze sweeping the polished halls. He noticed the new guards, their faces unfamiliar, their movements subtly different from the old royal guard he had trained with for years. He saw the way Lady Seraphina's maid, a pale woman with eyes that missed nothing, seemed to be everywhere at once. The whispers at court had shifted too. No longer were they about trade routes or border disputes. Now they spoke of the queen-to-be's influence, her impeccable taste, her devotion. Gareth remembered Lyra's desperate pleas, the raw pain in her amethyst eyes. He had dismissed her words as the ramblings of a distraught woman then. But now the pieces began to shift in his mind. The swiftness of Lord Eldrin's departure, the quiet sidelining of Lady Eleanor, the constant presence of Seraphina at Alaric's side, almost like a shadow. He saw the lines of exhaustion etched around King Alaric's eyes, the way the king often deferred to Seraphina's suggestions with a tired nod. Gareth felt a cold prickle of dread along his spine. His instincts, honed by years of protecting his king, told him something was terribly wrong, even if he could not yet name it. He kept his observations to himself, his lips pressed into a tight line, but his kind, dark eyes held a new, troubled depth. Back in the Whispering Gardens, Lyra huddled beneath the gnarled branches of an ancient oak, the cool, damp air clinging to her simple gown. Her solitude was absolute, broken only by the rustle of leaves and the distant, muffled sounds of palace life. Each day brought new, more agonizing visions of Seraphina's tightening grip on Alaric, her insidious weaving of a web that would soon ensnare him completely. Lyra's heart throbbed with a desperate urgency, a longing so profound it made her physically ache. She longed to touch Alaric's hand, to look into his gray eyes and shake him awake, but she was trapped. Her own tears fell onto the damp earth, silent prayers for a truth that would not be heard. She had to try. She had to. The thought was a small, fragile flame in the deepening darkness of her despair. There was a young kitchen maid, Alara, who sometimes brought her meager meals. Alara had always been kind, her eyes holding a flicker of sympathy, a memory of Lyra before her fall from grace. Lyra began to watch for her and to choose her moments, her mind racing for a way to communicate without alerting the ever-present guards. One afternoon, as Alara placed a tray of dry bread and water on the small stone table, Lyra reached out, her hand trembling slightly. She plucked a night-blooming jasmine blossom, its white petals still slightly unfurled, from the bush near the wall. The scent was cloying, almost suffocating, but she imbued it with meaning. She carefully folded the flower into a small, intricately woven piece of straw, an old childhood token she had kept. A simple knot pattern that only a handful of palace servants would recognize as her own. "Alara," Lyra whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse, her eyes darting towards the shadowed corners of the garden. "Take this, to Gareth, Sir Gareth." She emphasized the name, hoping Alara would understand the urgency, the importance. Lyra's gaze pleaded with the maid, conveying the unspoken words, the dire warning that could not be uttered aloud. Tell him the jasmine withers, but the roots run deep." It was a cryptic message, a fragment of her prophetic language, but she hoped Gareth, observant as he was, would recognize the symbolism, connect it to her earlier, rejected prophecy of the Shadow Blight. Alara's eyes widened slightly, her gaze flickering between the small, folded token in Lyra's hand and the distant palace walls. A shadow of fear crossed her face, but a flicker of compassion too. She quickly, almost imperceptibly, took the tiny package from Lyra's outstretched hand, her fingers brushing Lyra's, a brief, fleeting touch of human connection. "Yes, Lady Lyra," Alara murmured, her voice barely a breath. She quickly placed the choice down and moved to leave, clutching the small token in her palm, hidden from view. Lyra watched her go, a fragile tendril of hope unfurling in her chest, a desperate gamble against the suffocating silence. But hope, like the jasmine itself, was fleeting. Moments later, Lyra heard a sudden sharp gasp from just beyond the garden gate. The heavy wooden door creaked open, then slammed shut with a resounding thud. A different guard, one of Seraphina's new men with a cold, unyielding face, marched towards Lyra, his eyes like chips of flint. He held out his hand, and in his open palm lay the small, crumpled straw token, the jasmine blossom crushed within its folds. The scent, now bruised and bitter, rose into the still air. Lyra's breath hitched in her throat. Her heart plummeted, each beat echoing the finality of her failure. The message, her last desperate attempt, had never even left the gardens. A guttural groan, deep within the ancient stone of the obsidian palace, tore through the morning's quiet. Dust, thick and choking, bloomed in the air like a sudden gray storm. King Alaric, standing near a towering archway, felt the tremor ripple up through the floor, a vibration that rattled his very bones. A section of the ceiling, adorned with a faded mural of a howling wolf, peeled away with a splintering crack and crashed to the marble floor just paces from where he stood. Stone chips scattered, sharp and gray, like startled birds. Alaric instinctively raised an arm, shielding his face from the cascade of debris. The scent of ancient mortar and disturbed plaster filled his nostrils, acrid and raw. His guards, usually so composed, scrambled forward, swords half drawn, their faces a mixture of shock and alarm. The king looked at the gaping hole above, then at the shattered mosaic on the floor, a jagged wound in the palace's grandeur. He felt a cold dread prickle at his skin, a ghost of a warning he could not quite place. Lady Seraphina, who had been discussing the morning's itinerary with him, gasped dramatically, her hand flying to her mouth. Her emerald eyes, usually so calm, widened with a convincing display of terror. "My king," she breathed, her voice laced with concern. "Are you unharmed? This old palace, it seems, protests your tireless work even now." She stepped closer, her silken gown rustling softly, her hand lightly touching his arm. The warmth of her touch was a soothing balm against the chill he had felt. Alaric shook his head, pushing away the lingering unease. "I am quite all right, Seraphina. A close call, perhaps, but nothing more." He looked at the guards, then back at the damage. "See to it that this is repaired immediately, and ensure the structural integrity of the entire wing is reassessed. We cannot have our home crumbling around us." His voice, though firm, held a note of weariness. He had so many matters demanding his attention, so many treaties to negotiate, so many duties to fulfill. He did not have the luxury of dwelling on such unfortunate coincidences. Seraphina's explanation, simple and logical, fit neatly into his overwhelming schedule. Deep within the whispering gardens, Lyra Thorne felt a sharp, disorienting jolt, as if the very ground beneath her had shifted. The sweet, cloying scent of jasmine, usually a comfort, turned oppressive, tightening around her throat. Her silver hair, unbound and trailing around her, seemed to vibrate with an unseen energy. A sudden, piercing image flashed behind her eyes. Falling stone, a cloud of dust, in the fleeting shadow of Alaric's powerful frame. Her breath hitched. The air grew heavy, thick with an unspoken warning. She pressed her palms to her temples, trying to steady the swirling fragments of her vision. The taste of chalky dust filled her mouth, though she had consumed nothing. Her heart began to pound, a frantic drum against her ribs, echoing the fear she had not allowed herself to feel for her own plight. This was not about her. This was about him. The vividness of the image, the raw, undeniable danger, screamed at her with an urgency that transcended her confinement. He had been close, too close. "It was not an accident," she whispered, her voice raw, lost amidst the rustle of the ancient, dark leaves that surrounded her. Her amethyst eyes, usually a soft, introspective pool, now glowed with a faint, internal light, reflecting the growing intensity of her burden. She closed her eyes, willing the images to coalesce to show her more. She saw Seraphina's serene face, a fleeting, almost imperceptible smirk playing at the corners of her lips as she surveyed the damage. Lyra felt a surge of icy certainty. The enemy was not external. The enemy was already within. The thought was a bitter taste in her mouth. She clenched her fists, her nail biting into her palms, a desperate, futile gesture against her powerlessness. A few days later, a subtle but equally chilling event unfolded during King Alaric's evening meal. He sat alone in his private dining chamber, the flickering candlelight casting long, dancing shadows across the tapestries that depicted the ancient wolves of his lineage. A steaming platter of roasted boar, his favorite, was placed before him by a young, nervous servant. The aroma of herbs and rich meat filled the room, promising comfort after a long day of tedious court matters. Alaric reached for a succulent piece, his hand hovering over the dish. Just as his fingers brushed the ceramic, a small, gray palace cat, usually wary of the dining hall, darted from beneath the table with an unexpected yowl. It launched itself at the servant's legs, startling him so completely that the platter tilted precariously. With a desperate cry, the servant fumbled, and the entire dish, contents and all, crashed to the polished stone floor, scattering shards of ceramic and steaming meat across the room. A strong, sickly sweet smell, distinct from the boar, now hung in the air, oddly metallic, almost like almonds. Alaric recoiled, his appetite instantly vanished. The clatter echoed in the sudden silence, a sharp intrusion into the otherwise peaceful evening. He looked at the mess, then at the trembling servant, who was already on his knees, stammering apologies. A flicker of suspicion, cold and sharp, darted through Alaric's mind. 2 close calls within a week. It was highly unusual. He found himself remembering Lyra's distraught face, her desperate warnings, despite his efforts to dismiss them. The memory pricked at him. Before he could voice his rising concern, Seraphina appeared in the doorway, drawn by the noise. Her expression was one of gentle exasperation. "Oh dear, what a clumsy fellow," she said, her voice soft but with an undertone of mild reprimand. She surveyed the scene with a practiced grace, then turned to Alaric, her gaze filled with soothing empathy. "My king, you have had such a trying day. This is simply the last straw for a tired servant. Nothing more. Perhaps a simple bowl of soup would be better tonight, away from this unfortunate scene." Alaric looked at the fallen food, then back at Seraphina's reassuring smile. The smell of the disrupted meal, that strange, sweet undertone, still bothered him. Yet Seraphina offered such a clear, reasonable explanation. He was tired. He was stressed. Perhaps he was simply becoming paranoid from the weight of his duties. "Perhaps you are right, Seraphina," he sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "A simple soup, then, and dismiss this man with a stern warning, not harsh punishment. He seems shaken enough." He wanted to believe her. He needed to believe her. The alternative, that someone within his trusted circle meant him harm, was a truth too terrifying to confront. In the Whispering Gardens, Lyra felt a sudden, sickening lurch in her stomach, as if she had swallowed something foul. Her tongue tingled with a metallic taste, followed by an intense, almond-like sweetness that made her gorge rise. She saw a flash of a dining chamber, rich tapestries, and the distinctive silver of the king's signet ring on a hand reaching towards a platter. Then a clumsy movement, a crash, and that cloying, deadly scent. Her vision was no longer a mere impression, but a sickeningly clear fragment of what had just transpired. "Poison," she breathed, the word a rasp against her dry throat. Her eyes flew open, candid and wild, reflecting the fading light of the afternoon sky. She could almost feel the burning in Alaric's throat, the agony of his last breath, and the image made her chest tighten with unbearable pain. The king was in danger every moment. Every incident was a deliberate step towards fulfilling her own terrifying prophecy. Her heart ached, a deep, hollow throb of helplessness. Her tears began to well, hot and stinging, blurring the edges of the overgrown path before her. She pressed her face into the cool, damp earth, the scent of jasmine mingling with the imagined aroma of death. Her prophetic gift, a burden she had carried since childhood, now felt like a curse, showing her the inevitable doom she was powerless to prevent. She was a bird in a gilded cage, her warnings unheard, her pleas dismissed as the ravings of a madwoman. The injustice of it all burned within her. She was supposed to protect him. It was her duty, her very purpose. Yet she was trapped, watching the shadows lengthen around the man she loved, the man she was sworn to serve. Her thoughts spiraled, a torrent of desperate ideas. Could she scream loud enough for him to hear? Could she carve a message into the bark of a tree, hoping some loyal gardener would find it? But the guards were ever present, their stoic faces a constant reminder of her imprisonment. Every attempt she made to reach out was met with a wall of indifference, or worse, intercepted. The weight of her isolation pressed down on her, crushing her spirit. She felt utterly alone, surrounded only by the rustling leaves and the chilling echoes of her unheeded prophecies. The despair was a cold, creeping tendril around her heart. Alaric, despite Seraphina's soothing words, found his sleep increasingly troubled. The image of the crumbling ceiling, the strange scent from the dropped meal, these incidents lingered, unwelcome guests in his mind. He would wake in the dead of night, a sense of unease clinging to him like a shroud. He would tell himself it was merely the stress of governing, the heavy crown he wore, but a tiny, insistent voice in the back of his mind whispered differently. It was a voice he tried to silence, a voice that sounded vaguely like Lyra. Seraphina, ever watchful, noticed his subtle shifts. She would find him staring into the flickering hearth, his brow furrowed, a faraway look in his gray eyes. She would approach him with a gentle touch, a soft word, asking about his burdens. "My king," she would say, her voice like warm honey, "you carry the weight of this kingdom upon your shoulders. It is only natural for such trivial matters to seem larger than they are. The old palace has its creaks and groans, and our servants, though loyal, are only human." She skillfully wove her reassurances, subtly shifting the blame. Perhaps, she mused one evening, her hand resting delicately on his arm, Lyra's recent difficulties have cast a pall over the palace. Such anxieties can infect a household, making every small mishap seem like an omen. Her emerald eyes met his, filled with a deep, unwavering empathy that settled his troubled thoughts. She was so logical, so composed, so utterly devoted. How could he doubt her? How could he doubt the woman who brought such calm to his chaotic life? He dismissed the gnawing feeling, pushing it down deeper and deeper. Lyra was a troubled soul, her gift a burden that twisted her mind. Seraphina was his rock, his future queen. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw only grace and loyalty. He saw the future stability of his kingdom. He had to be strong. He had to trust his judgment. He turned away from the flickering embers, away from the unsettling whispers of his own mind, and sought solace in Seraphina's steady presence. He could not afford to be distracted by imagined threats, not when so much depended on him. Lyra's visions, once sporadic and clouded, now assaulted her with relentless clarity. Each day brought a new flash, a new fragment of danger befalling Alaric, each more specific than the last. A loose stone on a stairwell, a faltering hinge on a chamber door, a suddenly ill horse. She felt the impact of each near miss as if it happened to her own body, a tightening in her chest, a phantom pain in her limbs. The Whispering Gardens, her former sanctuary, now felt like a crucible, refining her prophetic gift with agonizing intensity. The beautiful, blooming jasmine offered no comfort, its heady scent instead reminding her of the suffocating grip of her despair. Her fingers, slender and pale, clenched handfuls of the damp earth, drawing the cool moisture deep into her skin. The air grew thick with unspoken warnings, pressing in on her from all sides. She closed her amethyst eyes, seeking not to block the visions, but to embrace them, to understand them, to find a way, any way, to break free. The images swirled, a kaleidoscope of danger, each scene a fleeting glimpse of Alaric's unwitting peril. The silent suffering became a living thing inside her, a physical ache that refused to dissipate. Then a new vision bloomed, not a flash of an event, but a deep, pervasive truth. The world around her dissolved. The familiar damp earth beneath her hands vanished, replaced by cold, unyielding stone. She was plunged deep beneath the obsidian palace, into the very bedrock upon which it stood. The air was heavy, stagnant, carrying the faint metallic scent of damp iron and ancient decay. Her eyes, open in this inner world, saw what no mortal eyes could. There, coiled and twisting beneath the vast foundations, was a root. Not a root of earth and soil, but a monstrous, dark, gnarled entity, its tendrils thick as a man's arm, its surface rough and black like hardened lava. It pulsed with a malevolent, silent energy, slowly, insidiously, pushing its way through the very stone. Its form was disturbingly familiar, a chilling echo of the shadow blight tree from her very first prophecy. It was not merely a symbol now, but a physical manifestation of the corruption, growing unseen, undermining the very heart of the kingdom. This twisted root, unseen by all but her, was reaching, searching, ready to consume everything. A new shadow crept through the ancient stones of the obsidian palace, colder than the last, settling over Lyra like a shroud. She sat by the narrow window in her chamber, the chill air carrying the scent of damp earth and distant, decaying leaves from the whispering gardens below. Her fingers traced the rough-hewn stone, feeling the faint tremor of the palace's foundation, a phantom echo of the dark, twisted roots she had seen in her last terrifying vision. Those roots were not merely beneath the palace, they were within its very heart, a creeping blight. King Alaric, meanwhile, grappled with a different kind of darkness, the weariness that clung to him like a second skin. The recent string of accidents, though dismissed as coincidences, had frayed his nerves. He sat in his study, the rich scent of cedar wood and old parchment filling the air, a half-finished goblet of spiced wine cooling on his desk. The weight of his crown felt heavier with each passing day. He longed for the clarity Lyra once brought, before her visions became a torrent of distress he could not understand. Lady Seraphina Sterling glided into his study then, her golden hair shimmering in the soft light of the hearth. She carried herself with an effortless grace, her emerald eyes reflecting a practiced concern that always seemed to soothe the king's troubled mind. Her voice, soft and melodic, was a balm to his weary spirit. "My king," she began, her tone laced with a gentle sorrow. "My heart aches for Lyra. Her beautiful mind, and once so bright, now clouded by these dark imaginings." She paused, allowing her words to sink in, her gaze unwavering. "She suffers so, consumed by her own despair." Alaric looked up, his gray eyes shadowed with fatigue. "She insists on this danger, Seraphina, this shadow blight. She speaks of it as if it were already here." He ran a hand through his dark hair, a sigh escaping his lips. "I do not wish her ill, but her warnings only sow fear among the court. The advisors are restless." Seraphina moved closer, her silken gown rustling softly, filling the space with a delicate floral perfume. She rested a hand, light as a falling feather, on his arm. "Perhaps, my king, she does not mean to. Her illness, her delusion, they compel her. What if we could offer her peace? Not a punishment, but a path back to herself, to us." Her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, as if sharing a sacred secret. "I have consulted with the royal healers, the most learned in the land. They speak of an elixir, a gentle remedy, a soothing balm that can calm the troubled mind, dispelling these dark visions." Alaric's gaze sharpened, a flicker of hope in his tired eyes. "An elixir? To cure her madness?" The word felt harsh on his tongue, but Seraphina had made it seem almost merciful. He pictured Lyra as she used to be, before the frantic pleas, before the tears that always seemed to fall, heavy with a sorrow he could not comprehend. He remembered her laugh, light as bells, and the quiet comfort of her presence. He missed that Lyra. He yearned for her return. Seraphina nodded slowly, her expression one of profound empathy. "Not a cure, my king, but a guiding light. It eases the mind, allowing the spirit to find its balance again. It is said to wash away the shadows, leaving only clarity. Imagine Lyra restored to her former self, free from this burden that grips her." She squeezed his arm gently, her touch warm and reassuring. She could rejoin society, free of these delusions, living a life of peace. Does she not deserve that, my king? The thought of Lyra, calm and smiling once more, free from the torment of her visions, was a powerful lure. He had tried everything else. He had isolated her, hoping the quiet would help. It had not. He had dismissed her warnings, hoping she would see reason. She had not. Now Serafina offered a tangible solution, a path to Lyra's recovery that did not involve harsh judgments or further confinement. He weighed his deep affection for Lyra against the growing unrest in his court, the subtle shifts in loyalty he felt but could not quite pinpoint. He wanted stability for his kingdom and for Lyra. Is it safe? Alaric asked, his voice hesitant. The idea of administering anything to Lyra against her will troubled him deeply, but Serafina's conviction was compelling. Her words painted a picture of gentle healing, of a return to the Lyra he remembered, the Lyra he had loved. He dismissed a nagging whisper of unease, attributing it to his own exhaustion and the endless pressure of his duties. Entirely safe, my king, Serafina assured him, her smile unwavering. A potion of ancient herbs, known for their restorative properties. The healers guarantee its efficacy and its gentle nature. It will simply help her find her way back. She let her gaze sweep around the grand, yet increasingly isolated study. The palace feels heavy, does it not? With such dark prophecies hanging over us. Imagine the relief, the lightness. If Lyra were to find peace, it would restore calm to us all. Alaric considered her words, the subtle implication that Lyra's state was somehow burdening the entire kingdom. He did not want to appear weak, nor did he want his people to suffer because of his inability to manage his prophetess. He pictured the serene face Serafina presented, then contrasted it with Lyra's often tear-stained, desperate visage. Serafina's solution seemed so clean, so logical, so full of compassionate intent. He closed his eyes for a moment, picturing the Lyra from years ago, before the visions became a curse. He wanted her back. He needed her back. Very well, Alaric said, his voice low, heavy with a reluctant agreement that felt more like a surrender. If the healers confirm its safety, and if it truly offers Lyra a chance at peace, then let it be done. But with gentleness, Serafina, always with gentleness. He opened his eyes, meeting Serafina's gaze. He saw only profound relief and understanding there, or so he thought. Serafina bowed her head, a demure, triumphant flicker in her emerald eyes that Alaric was too wary to notice. Of course, my king, only gentleness. I will see to it myself. She rose, her movements fluid, and swept out of the study, leaving Alaric alone with the heavy silence and the faint, lingering scent of her perfume. He felt a strange mix of hope and a profound, inexplicable sadness. He had made a decision he believed was for the best, for Lyra, for his kingdom, for himself. Yet a cold knot settled in his stomach, a sense of foreboding he could not shake. In her confined chamber, Lyra felt the shift, a sudden chilling drop in the palace's energy. It was as if a great, unseen door had slammed shut, sealing her fate. The Root's vision from before resurfaced in her mind, not beneath the palace now, but twisting around her own heart, tightening with each beat. Her breath hitched. She knew this feeling. It was the precursor to a vision, but also to something far more immediate, far more personal. A deep, cold dread settled over her, a premonition that prickled her skin and tasted of metallic fear. She rose, pacing the small room, her bare feet silent on the cold stone floor. The familiar scent of damp stone and her own fear filled the air. Her mind raced, sifting through fragments of images that swirled at the edges of her consciousness. A dark liquid, a forced hand, a sudden searing pain. This was not a reprieve. This was a trap, more insidious than any iron bar. They were not trying to heal her. They were trying to silence her. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. Lyra clasped her hands over her mouth, stifling a cry. She was powerless, completely. The king, her Alaric, had been swayed. She had seen it in her visions, the way Serafina's words wrapped around him like silk, soft and suffocating. He saw her as mad, a burden, and now he would seek to erase the very gift that allowed her to protect him. Tears welled in her amethyst eyes, but she fought them back. Not now. She needed clarity, even if her heart was breaking. Her gaze fell upon the small, intricately carved wooden bird she kept hidden beneath a loose floorboard, a gift from Alaric years ago. Its smooth, cool surface was a small comfort. She clutched it, the familiar texture a tether to a past that felt increasingly distant. She closed her eyes, trying to reach out with her senses, to understand the precise nature of the threat. She felt the palace walls pressing in, the air growing thick, heavy with an unseen presence. The distinct rhythmic sound of heavy footsteps began to echo down the corridor outside her chamber. They were slow, deliberate, each thud a hammer blow against her racing heart. Lyra's eyes snapped open, locking onto her door, her breath caught in her throat. This was it, the culmination of all the whispers, all the shadows. She felt a profound sense of abandonment, a piercing cold that seeped into her bones. Alaric had agreed. He truly believed this was for her own good. The pain of his betrayal, however misguided, was a sharp, bitter agony. The footsteps stopped directly outside her door. She heard a soft clink like metal against porcelain. Then the low murmur of a voice she did not recognize. Her fingers locked around the wooden bird, her knuckles white. She could not run. There was nowhere to go. She could not fight. Her captors were too numerous, too strong. All she could do was wait. The heavy oak door creaked open, revealing the imposing figure of a royal guard, his face impassive beneath his polished helmet. His armor gleamed dully in the dim light of the corridor, reflecting a distorted image of Lyra's fear. He held a small silver tray, and upon it sat a dark, steaming goblet. A faint, acrid odor, like bitter herbs and something metallic, drifted into the room. The liquid within the goblet was an ominous, murky black, catching the faint light like an abyss. The guard's voice was deep, devoid of emotion, yet Lyra detected a fleeting trace of something akin to pity in his dark eyes. "Lady Lyra," he said, his words echoing flatly in the small chamber, "by the king's command, you are to consume this elixir. It is for your health, to restore your peace of mind." He stepped fully into the room, blocking the only exit, the scent of the potion growing stronger, more potent, more dreadful. He extended the tray, the goblet glinting, compelling her to drink. The guard held the goblet firm, its dark surface reflecting the single flickering candle like a watchful, unblinking eye. Lyra's breath hitched, a thin, reedy sound in the silent room, caught in her throat. She could smell the elixir even from a foot away, a sickly, sweet odor that clung to the air, laced with something metallic and acrid. It reminded her of old blood and rusted iron, a scent that promised nothing good. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage, each beat a painful thud. Her fingers, usually so graceful, felt heavy and unresponsive as the guard pressed the rim against her lips. The goblet was cool porcelain at first, then the heat of the liquid within seeped through, a disturbing warmth that felt wrong. She tasted it before she even swallowed, a bitter, chemical tang coating her tongue, making her recoil instinctively. The guard's grip on her jaw tightened, firm but not cruel, a simple execution of orders. There was no escaping this. She swallowed. The liquid was thick, viscous, sliding down her throat like oil and grit. It burned, a fiery path scorching its way from her tongue, down her esophagus, into her stomach. It was ash and venom, just as she had sensed, a concoction designed not to heal but to silence. Each painful gulp was a surrender, a forced submission to Seraphina's will, a deliberate poisoning of her truth. Her eyes, wide and luminous even in the dim light, locked onto the guard's face, searching for any flicker of understanding or compassion. She found none, only the grim resolve of a man doing his duty. Her body convulsed, a violent shiver rippling through her from head to toe. Her stomach churned, threatening to reject the vile substance, but the guard held her steady, his unspoken command forcing it down. Tears, hot and real this time, welled in her eyes not from prophecy, but from pure, raw agony. They traced paths down her cheeks, mingling with the bitter residue on her lips. This was not the icy clarity of her visions, but a brutal, unwanted invasion. This was an attempt to break her, to shatter her twine, to silence the inconvenient truth her gift insisted on speaking. The last drop was gone, the goblet pulled away with a soft clink. Lyra gasped, a ragged, desperate sound, her chest heaving. The burning in her throat intensified, radiating outwards, a pulsing ache that spread through her veins. It felt as if her very blood was being set alight, consumed from the inside. A wave of nausea washed over her, making her head spin. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to find a moment of peace, a return to the familiar darkness that sometimes offered solace. But there was no peace. Behind her eyelids, a blinding flash erupted, a searing white light that pierced through the darkness. It was immediately followed by a kaleidoscope of images, fragmented and chaotic, assaulting her senses without mercy. She saw flashes of crimson and gold, the glint of steel, the shadowed faces of men she did not recognize. There was a faint metallic tang in the air now, a strange coppery smell that filled her nostrils, mirroring the taste in her mouth. Her head throbbed with an unbearable pressure, as if her skull itself was being pried open. The images came faster, a dizzying, relentless assault. A broken crown lay on a cold stone floor, its jewels scattered like fallen stars. A hand, pale and slender, reached for something hidden beneath a tapestry, a glint of a dark hilt. Then Alaric's face appeared, contorted in an expression of anguish and betrayal, his eyes wide and unseeing. Lyra gasped again, a choked sound, her breath catching. The pain behind her eyes was no longer just pain. It was an epicenter, a point from which all the fragmented visions seemed to emanate, tearing at the fabric of her sanity. A cacophony of sounds joined the visual onslaught. Whispers, sharp and venomous, snaked through her mind, indistinct but menacing. The clang of swords, distant and muffled, yet terrifyingly real. A woman's chilling laugh, high and triumphant, a sound that twisted Lyra's gut. She knew that laugh. It was Seraphina. The sound echoed and multiplied, bouncing around the hollow chambers of her mind, threatening to shatter her fragile hold on reality. Her ears rang, a high-pitched whine that drowned out the quiet hum of the palace night. Her body began to tremble, then convulse violently. Her muscles seized and spasmed, jerking her limbs uncontrollably. She could feel the cold sweat breaking out on her skin, clinging to her forehead and neck, a stark contrast to the burning inferno within. The bed beneath her felt like a distant, shifting landscape. She wanted to scream, to cry out for help, but her throat was locked, choked by the burning and the overwhelming sensory overload. Her inner voice, usually a clear guiding presence, was now a fractured chorus of panic and confusion. This is it, she thought, a desperate, fading whisper in the storm of her mind. This is how it ends, not with a truth understood, but with a mind broken. She clung to the image of Alaric, his strong, kind face, the memory of his touch, however fleeting. It was the only anchor she had in the tumultuous sea of her forced vision. She had tried to save him, she had tried to wash them, and this was her reward, a descent into a living nightmare, dragged down by the very gift she possessed. The guard, seeing her violent reaction, took a step back, a flicker of concern in his eyes, perhaps even a hint of fear. He had been instructed to ensure she drank the elixir, to watch for its immediate effects. He had not been told it would be quite so dramatic. He called for his companion, his voice gruff, his tone drained with unease. "She's taken it," he reported, his words clipped and quick. "Reacted violently. Convulsions. Shaking." His fellow guard, a younger man with nervous eyes, peered into the room. Lyra was a writhing shape on the bed, her silver hair thrashing, her body contorting in unnatural ways. It was a disturbing sight, one that spoke of suffering, not of healing. They exchanged uneasy glances, then quickly retreated, closing the heavy wooden door behind them, sealing Lyra in her torment. The click of the latch echoed in the silence, a final, definitive sound confirming her isolation. They found Lady Seraphina in her private salon, surrounded by plush silks and the scent of expensive incense. She sat poised and serene, a half-finished embroidery piece resting in her lap, her emerald eyes bright with an almost unnatural calm. She looked up as the guards entered, her smile sweet and guileless. "Ah, good sirs," she purred, her voice a low melodic hum. "Is it done? Has the poor girl finally taken her medicine?" The senior guard cleared his throat, his gaze avoiding her unnervingly composed face. Yes, my lady. She consumed the elixir as instructed. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Her reaction was considerable. Violent tremors, Lady Seraphina. She seemed in great distress. Seraphina's smile faltered, replaced by a look of carefully constructed sorrow. Her brow furrowed, her lips pursed in feigned sympathy. Oh dear, my heart aches for her. Such a sensitive soul, so prone to these fits. She placed a delicate hand to her chest as if truly pained. Did she fight it? Did she resist its healing properties? She did not resist the taking of it, my lady, the guard clarified, a hint of steel in his voice. But the moment it was consumed, she began to convulse. Her eyes, they seemed to see things that were not there. He shivered faintly, recalling the terrifying intensity in Lyra's amethyst gaze. Seraphina let out a soft, mournful sigh. Poor, poor Lyra. It is just as I feared. Her delusions have taken root so deeply that even the gentlest remedy causes her such agony. She rose, her golden gown rustling like dry leaves. Continue to observe her, of course. Ensure she is comfortable as much as possible. These things take time. The elixir must work its magic. She dismissed them with a graceful wave of her hand, her movements fluid and unhurried. As the guards bowed and turned to leave, her sorrowful expression evaporated, replaced by a subtle, almost imperceptible curve of her lips. A faint, triumphant glint sparked in her emerald eyes. Her plan was working perfectly. Lyra, the troublesome prophetess, would soon be nothing more than a raving lunatic, lost in her own twisted visions, harmless and forgotten. The path to the throne was clearing. The king's heart, she believed, would soon be hers alone to manipulate. She smiled then, a cold, calculating smile that never quite reached her eyes. The quiet hum of the palace felt like a symphony of her own making. Meanwhile, Lyra's world had dissolved into pure, unadulterated chaos. The room spun around her, a dizzying vortex of shadows and distorted light. Her body was no longer her own, but a puppet controlled by unseen strings, jerking and spasming without her consent. The bed sheets, once a soft comfort, now felt rough against her clammy skin as she thrashed, utterly at the mercy of the elixir's insidious power. She could hear her own ragged breathing, a desperate struggle for air, but it was muffled, distant, as if coming from another dimension. Her mind was a battlefield. The fragmented images continued their relentless assault, each one a sharp shard of terror. She saw Seraphina again, not in the feigned sorrow she had shown the guards, but with that chilling, triumphant smile, her eyes burning with malevolent glee. The vision was so clear, so potent, that Lyra felt a fresh wave of nausea, of visceral repulsion. Then the images shifted, faster than before. A dark, twisted root, thicker now, snaking its way through the palace foundations, its tendrils reaching for the throne room. The shadow blight was growing. It was real. A vision of the royal feast flashed before her, a scene of opulent grandeur tainted by a sinister undercurrent. She saw Alaric, strong and noble, raising a goblet to his lips, surrounded by faces that smiled but held daggers in their hearts. A fleeting glimpse of a small, ornate vial, half hidden in the sleeve of a servant, its contents shimmering with an unholy light. It was all a blur, a terrifying montage of betrayal and impending doom, all centered around Alaric, her king. Her heart ached with a deep, profound sorrow, not for herself, but for the man she was failing to protect. She tried to focus, to pull a single thread from the tangled web of visions, but it was impossible. Each image superimposed itself on the next, creating grotesque, impossible landscapes. The obsidian palace morphed into a skeletal tree to know its towers becoming grasping branches, its windows like empty, weeping eyes. The scent of ozone, sharp and electric, now filled her nostrils, accompanied by a faint, sickly sweet perfume that she recognized as Seraphina's. It was everywhere, seeping into her very being. Her throat was raw, not just from the burning of the elixir, but from the silent screams that tore through her mind. She clenched her mouth, biting down hard, tasting blood, a desperate attempt to ground herself, to feel something real amidst the hallucinatory horror. But even that sensation felt distant, disconnected. Her body was a vessel, hijacked by the potent concoction, her spirit trapped within. forced to witness the terrifying unraveling of her world. The convulsions intensified, shaking her entire frame with brutal force. Her head slammed against the pillow, then lifted, only to fall again. A moan escaped her lips, a low, guttural sound she barely recognized as her own. She was losing herself, fragment by fragment, piece by agonizing piece. The edges of her vision blurred, the room fading in and out of existence, replaced by the relentless, terrifying premonitions. It felt like falling an endless plummet into an abyss of fractured realities. One moment she was in the Whispering Gardens, the scent of damp earth heavy in the air. The next she was in the throne room, surrounded by shadowed figures whispering treason. Then, a sudden blinding flash, and she was back in her chamber, gasping for air. Her body racked with tremors, her vision swimming with residual ghostly images. The distinction between waking and dreaming, between reality and prophecy, had utterly dissolved. She was caught in the terrifying in-between. Her body, drained and battered, gave one final violent spasm. The world tilted, then plunged into a swirling vortex of blackness, punctuated by sparks of crimson and flashes of Seraphina's triumphant, cruel smile. Lyra collapsed onto her bed, a broken, trembling heap, her vision blurring irrevocably between the stark, undeniable reality of her suffering and the terrifying, relentless premonitions of doom. The world had fractured for Lyra, dissolving into a kaleidoscope of pain and fleeting shadows. Days bled into one another, marked only by the shifting light through her window and the relentless fire that raged within her veins. The elixir, meant to quell her visions, had instead ignited a terrifying inferno, burning away the boundaries between reality and the spectral future. Her body felt like a fragile vessel, constantly on the verge of shattering, each breath a conscious effort. Her skin was a canvas of sweat and chills, her limbs heavy and unresponsive, while her mind spun in a dizzying vortex. She heard voices, not just in her head, but echoing from the very stones of her chamber. King Alaric's resonant command, Seraphina's silken whispers, the clinking of steel, the muffled cries of distant sorrow. These sounds were not distinct. They were a discordant symphony, blending with the throb behind her eyes. Sometimes she saw faces, twisted in malice or frozen in fear, their features indistinct, like reflections on troubled water. A flash of emerald eyes, a gleam of gold hair, a powerful hand gripping something dark and sharp. These images came unbidden, unanchored, assaulting her with their terrifying potential, yet offering no clear narrative. She was adrift in a sea of future fragments, unable to grasp any solid truth. Her throat burned, a constant reminder of the bitter liquid she had been forced to swallow. Its essence seemed to seep into her very bones, tightening her muscles, sending tremors through her frame. She lay curled on her bed, the sheets tangled around her, damp with fever and fear. The air, usually cool in the Whispering Gardens, now felt heavy and stifling, pressing down on her. Every sound, every change in the light, sent a jolt of alarm through her overtaxed nerves. She longed for a moment of quiet, a single beat of calm in the storm. But it never came. The elixir had stolen her peace, replacing it with this relentless, agonizing dance on the edge of comprehension. Meanwhile, within the glittering, chilling halls of the Obsidian Palace, Sir Gareth found his own peace increasingly disturbed. He moved through the court, a silent observer, his broad shoulders squared, but his gaze sharp, missing nothing. He had heard the hushed whispers about Lyra Thorne, confined to the gardens, now reportedly suffering from a terrible malady after receiving a special treatment. Seraphina Sterling, however, seemed to flourish in her absence. Her smile, once merely serene, now held a subtle edge, a glint of triumph he found profoundly unsettling. He saw her speaking with courtiers, her golden hair a beacon of grace, her words always perfectly chosen, yet there was a new, almost predatory confidence in her bearing. He remembered Lyra's desperate warnings, her tear-filled eyes, the raw fear in her voice. At the time he had dismissed them as the ramblings of a distressed woman, easily swayed by Seraphina's calm assurances. But then came the accidents, the unstable ceiling beam, the tainted wine, the loose stone on the king's favored path. Each incident had been explained away by Serafina with such practiced ease, such plausible reasoning, that even Alaric had accepted them as unfortunate coincidences. Yet, the sheer number of them and their increasing proximity to the king had begun to gnaw at Gareth's ingrained sense of loyalty and duty. He felt a cold knot of dread tightening in his stomach. His unease deepened when he observed the palace physician, Master Alara, a man of quiet integrity, looking unusually harried and pale. Gareth caught him one evening in a deserted corridor, his usual composure replaced by a frantic anxiety. Alara clutched a leather-bound book to his chest, his eyes darting nervously. Gareth approached him with a respectful nod. "Master Alara," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You seem troubled. Is all well?" Alara started, his gaze flickering away. "Sir Gareth, all is as well as can be expected in these trying times." He shifted, clearly uncomfortable. "It is Lyra Thorne I speak of," Gareth pressed gently. "Her condition, after the elixir, is it truly as Serafina claims, a cleansing? She seems worse." He chose his words carefully, knowing the walls had ears. A flicker of genuine anguish crossed Alara's face before he quickly masked it. "The elixir is potent, Sir Gareth. Its effects are profound. Her body needs time to adjust." His voice was strained, the words sounding rehearsed. "And its composition?" Gareth continued, his eyes fixed on Alara. "A unique blend, I hear. Were you consulted in its formulation?" Alara hesitated, his fingers tightening on the book. "Lady Serafina provided the primary recipe. I merely assisted with the preparation." He avoided Gareth's gaze, looking toward a shadowed alcove as if expecting someone to emerge. The scent of dried herbs and antiseptic clung to him, a stark contrast to the beeswax and stone of the palace. Gareth felt a prickle of suspicion. Master Alara was meticulous, a stickler for protocol. To merely assist with something so vital for a royal court member was highly irregular. "Lady Serafina brought this recipe herself?" Gareth asked, his voice even, though a cold dread was starting to form. "From where?" "She spoke of ancient remedies from her family lands," Alara mumbled, his voice barely audible. He suddenly glanced past Gareth, his eyes widening. "Forgive me, Sir Gareth. I am urgently needed elsewhere." He practically fled, disappearing around a corner, leaving Gareth standing alone in the echoing corridor. Gareth watched him go, a heavy frown creasing his brow. The encounter had raised more questions than answers. Serafina, with her ancient remedies? It seemed out of character for the refined, politically astute woman who rarely spoke of her past. He decided then that he could not dismiss his worries any longer. The king's safety was paramount, and his blind trust in Serafina felt like a gaping wound in the kingdom's defenses. He began his own quiet investigation, a shadow moving through shadows. He revisited the sites of the accidents, examining the seemingly innocuous details. The ceiling beam had been weakened by old borers, true, but the wood dust around it had a fresh, almost acrid smell, not the faint, powdery scent of long-standing decay. The poison wine had been quickly disposed of, but a stable hand who had tasted a drop had suffered a prolonged, violent illness. The man had since been sent away for his own recovery. Even the loose stone on the path had seemed too perfectly placed to cause maximum damage. Gareth spoke to kitchen staff, to minor guards, to chambermaids. He noticed that Serafina's personal retinue had grown, now including guards he did not recognize, men with hard, watchful eyes and no familial ties to the Wolf Kingdom's traditional guard lines. He also learned that Serafina had taken a keen interest in the palace's ancient scrolls and forgotten histories, spending hours in the musty archives, a place few ever visited. What was she searching for? The scent of old parchment and dust hung heavy in those deserted rooms. Back in her chamber, Lyra's torment continued. The visions now came with an almost physical force, like blows to her skull. She saw a forest of gnarled, dark trees, their branches clawing at a sky the color of bruised plums. The image pulsed with a terrible, malevolent energy, then vanished, replaced by the glint of steel. Her head swam, her stomach roiled, and a terrible pressure built behind her eyes. She felt a deep, wrenching sorrow, a profound grief for something she could not yet name, a loss that echoed through her very being. Her body rebelled, and hot, stinging tears began to stream down her face, unchecked. They were not merely tears of sorrow, but tears born of the elixir's brutal transformation, tears that carried the burning essence of her amplified, chaotic visions. They flowed relentlessly, carving fiery paths down her temples and cheeks, soaking into her hair and the pillow beneath her head. Each tear felt like a small part of her soul, ripped away and forced into liquid form. The air around her grew thick with a strange metallic tang, and the persistent taste of ash in her mouth became overwhelming. She closed her eyes, but the visions only intensified, playing out on the inside of her eyelids. She saw King Alaric, his face etched with worry, then abruptly his eyes widened in horror. She heard Seraphina's laugh, chilling and devoid of warmth, echoing in the cavernous spaces of her mind. A sense of frantic urgency clawed at her. She had to warn him, had to make him understand, but her voice was a ragged whisper lost in the noise of her own suffering. The tears kept coming, a never-ending river of pain. They ran down her face, collecting in the hollows of her collarbone, tracing paths across her neck, and pooling on the rough stone floor beside her bed. She noticed with a detached part of her mind that they felt strangely heavy, almost viscous. The room was cool, but the tears themselves were scalding, as if they carried the heat of the fever within her. She was barely conscious, her world narrowing to the constant flow and sting. One tear, larger than the others, trembled on the edge of her eyelid. It carried a strange inner luminescence, a faint, almost imperceptible glow. It detached itself slowly, tracing a final burning path down her cheek, across her jawline, and dripped onto the cold gray stone floor. As it touched the ancient rock, an impossible thing happened. The tear did not spread, did not evaporate, did not even darken the stone. Instead, with a soft, almost inaudible click, it froze. It solidified instantly, transforming from a shimmering droplet into a tiny crystalline bead, radiating a faint inner light that pulsed once, then settled into a steady, soft glow. A single tear falling from Lyra's eye had struck the stone floor, instantly freezing into a tiny glowing crystal. The memory of that impossible sight still lingered in her blurred vision, an anchor in the swirling chaos of her mind. Her body felt like a battlefield, every nerve end screaming from the elixir's insidious work. But a strange, new clarity was beginning to pierce through the haze. She pushed herself up from the cold stone where she had collapsed, her limbs heavy and unwilling, the air in her lungs burning with each shallow breath. The chamber, usually a dim sanctuary, now seemed to press in on her, its shadows concealing secrets only she could see. Her eyes, still stinging and overflowing, fixed on the floor. More tears were falling, thick and heavy, each one tracing a path down her pale cheek before meeting the unyielding stone. They did not splatter or spread like normal tears. Instead, with a soft, almost inaudible click, each drop solidified, perfectly preserved, into an intricate, icy pattern. They were tiny, delicate sculptures, shimmering faintly in the oppressive gloom, like captured fragments of moonlight. A gasp, more of disbelief than pain, escaped her lips. This was impossible, unreal, yet undeniably true. She reached out a trembling hand, her fingers brushing against one of the frozen tears. It was cold, exquisitely cold, but not brittle. It felt solid, dense, like polished glass, yet it was undeniably a tear, a part of her sorrow made manifest. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror and a nascent, terrifying hope. Was this another cruel trick of the elixir, another facet of the madness they wished upon her? Or was it something else, something profound and dangerous? As she looked closer, a faint, ethereal glow emanated from within the ice. It was like peering into a deep pool of water under a moonless sky, where faint, submerged lights flickered. She leaned in, her silver hair falling forward like a curtain around her face, trying to discern meaning from the shimmering depths. The pain behind her eyes, once a searing inferno, now felt like a tightly coiled spring, ready to release a torrent of understanding. And then it happened, a fleeting image, ephemeral as mist, ghosted within the first crystal she held. It was indistinct at first, a swirl of dark cloaks and hushed whispers, but then it sharpened. She saw Seraphina, her golden hair pulled back in an elaborate braid, her emerald eyes glinting, not with their usual serene charm, but with a cold, calculating malice Lyra had only ever seen in her most terrifying visions. Seraphina stood in a shadowed alcove, her back to a heavy tapestry, her head bent conspiratorially towards a figure whose face remained frustratingly obscured. Lyra's breath hitched. This was real. This was the future, held captive in a single frozen tear. Another tear solidified near her knee, and she reached for it, her fingers clumsy with shock. This one showed a different scene. A glint of polished steel, the dark, ornate hilt of a dagger lying half-hidden beneath a stack of parchment on a heavy oak desk. The room was familiar, the king's private study, a place Lyra knew well. Her stomach clenched with icy dread. The accidents, the coincidences Alaric had dismissed, they were no accidents at all. They were carefully orchestrated attempts, and the dagger was waiting for its moment. A wave of nausea washed over her, the lingering bitterness of the elixir threatening to overwhelm her. She pressed her hand to her mouth, stifling a cry. Each tear that fell now carried a fragment of the looming betrayal. They were tiny, perfect windows into the grim future she had so desperately tried to warn Alaric about, a future he had refused to see. The elixir, the potion meant to silence her, to cure her supposed madness, had instead made her truth undeniable. It had transformed her pain, her grief, her desperate warnings, into solid, irrefutable proof. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. Seraphina had thought to break her, to render her prophecies meaningless, but instead she had unwittingly forged the very weapon that would expose her. The irony was a bitter taste on Lyra's tongue, mingling with the salt of her tears. This was not a cure. This was a catalyst, a perverse amplification of her gift, turning her inner sight into outer evidence. It was a cruel, beautiful, terrifying miracle. She watched, mesmerized, as another tear dropped, forming a delicate miniature chalice of ice. Within its depths, a dark, viscous liquid swirled, reflecting a sliver of candlelight from an unseen source. Lyra knew that chalice. It was the one King Alaric used for his nightly draught of fortified wine, a ritual he never missed. And the liquid within was not wine. It was a slow, insidious poison, the kind that brought a creeping illness, sapping strength and reason before delivering its final, fatal blow. Alaric's fatigue, his growing listlessness, it all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. A quiet fury began to burn within Lyra, replacing the fear and confusion. She had been called a traitor, confined to these gardens like a dangerous beast. Her king, the man she had loved and served with every fiber of her being, had been deaf to her pleas, blind to the serpent in his court. But now she had the proof, undeniable and tangible. Each frozen tear was a testament to her truth, a silent scream of impending danger. She began to move with a purpose she hadn't felt in weeks, the elixir's lingering effects still making her head spin, but her determination overriding the physical pain. She had to gather them, every single one. These were the tears of prophecy, the sacred, painful manifestation of her gift. She moved slowly, meticulously, around the stone floor of her chamber, her fingers carefully picking up each shimmering crystal. Some were intricate, almost like snowflakes, revealing complex scenes of hushed conversations and furtive movements. Others were simpler, holding a single stark image, a shadowed hand, a heavy key, a map unfurling. Her mind raced, piecing together the fragments, each tear a vital piece of a terrible puzzle. She saw images of guards being bribed, their faces obscured but their actions clear. She saw a hidden passage beneath the palace, a secret route used for illicit meetings. The whispers she had heard in her fevered visions, the shadowy figures, the sense of an encroaching darkness. They were all here, compressed and frozen within these fragile jewels. Lyra carefully placed the collected tears into the small, embroidered pouch she always kept tucked beneath her simple sleeping gown. It was meant for herbs, for small tokens, but now it held the weight of a kingdom's fate. The fabric was thin, but she could feel the coolness of the crystals against her skin, a constant, chilling reminder of the urgency of her task. Each tear was precious, fragile, yet potent with truth. Her hands trembled, not with weakness now, but with the sheer adrenaline of her purpose. She had been powerless, a prisoner of her own visions, but the elixir had inadvertently given her a voice, a tangible way to prove the unseen. The thought of King Alaric, so honorable and trusting, falling victim to Seraphina's venomous schemes, ignited a fire within her. She had to reach him. She had to break through the layers of deceit and manipulation that had blinded him. Her heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic rhythm of desperate hope and fierce resolve. The Whispering Gardens had been her prison, but now, armed with these crystalline truths, they would become her launchpad. She clutched the pouch tightly, the weight of the tears of prophecy a heavy burden, a miraculous gift. A desperate plan, fragile as ice but sharp as a dagger, began to form in her mind. A daring escape and a confrontation that would either save her king or lead to her ultimate demise. Lyra's heart pounded, a frantic bird trapped inside. The cold tears felt heavy in her palm, a burden and a promise. She had to move. The jasmine scent usually calmed her, but tonight it felt stifling, thick with the damp earth of her confinement. Her amethyst eyes, usually luminous, now held a desperate glint, scanning shadows beyond her chamber door. Guards' low murmurs barely masked the growing tremor in her limbs. A distant fanfare from the grand hall signaled preparations for the royal banquet. Thomas, one guard, shifted, his head tilting as if catching a stray note. Jack, the other, sighed, adjusting his gauntlet, his attention diverted. This was it. Lyra had watched their routine for days, noting their focus shifts during palace preparations. She took a deep, shuddering breath. The bitter elixir taste still clung to her tongue, a constant reminder of torment and newfound power. Her muscles screamed for rest, but her will remained unbending. She pressed against the cold stone wall, its rough texture a contrast to her old silken gowns. With a soft scrape, she slipped through the door, her movements practiced, ethereal. Thomas, distracted by music, did not turn. Jack stayed absorbed in his gauntlet, oblivious. Lyra's breath caught, a gasp of terror and exhilaration. She was free, a ghost in her own prison for now. The cool corridor air, usually a detail, now felt like freedom, raising goosebumps. She clutched the tears of prophecy tighter, the icy sculptures a chilling promise. The palace corridors stretched before her, dimly lit by flickering torchlight. Each shadow felt like a potential trap. Lyra knew these passages well. She had explored them as a child, finding hidden nooks and forgotten stairwells. Her slender frame allowed her to move with speed, driven by desperation and fear of recapture. Every echo of her footsteps felt deafening in the silent halls. Beeswax and ancient stone filled her nostrils, a familiar scent now tainted by the metallic tang of her anxiety. She pictured Alaric, his strong face, his kind gray eyes, the man she loved. He was in danger, and only she held the key to his salvation. This image propelled her forward. Her path led deeper into the labyrinthine heart of the Obsidian Palace, towards the less-traveled service tunnels. These were usually deserted, used by servants for discreet movement. Tonight something was different. A faint clinking sound, like metal on stone, drew her attention. She froze, melting into the deeper shadows of a recessed archway. Her heart threatened to burst. It was too soon for discovery, too soon for hope to be extinguished. The sound grew clearer, closer, accompanied by the low thud of heavy boots. A tall, stoic figure emerged from the gloom, dark eyes scanning the passage with a troubled frown. It was Sir Gareth. A gasp almost escaped her, but she swallowed it, her throat dry and aching. Gareth, the king's loyal knight, whose initial doubt mirrored Alaric's. He wore polished armor, but his helmet was tucked under his arm, revealing a worried crease between his brows. He looked weary, as if the world's weight pressed on him. What was he doing in these hidden passages? Lyra's mind raced with suspicion and desperate hope. Was he Seraphina's pawn, or had her machinations finally stirred his keen intellect? The silence stretched, thick as he drew near. He stopped, his gaze fixed on her hiding place, as if he sensed her. His hand instinctively went to his sword hilt. Lyra knew she had to act quickly. Hesitation meant the end of everything. She stepped forward, letting faint torchlight catch her silver hair and the desperate pleas in her amethyst eyes. "Gareth," she whispered, her voice a fragile wisp, barely audible above her pounding blood. He flinched, his eyes widening in shock. Disbelief and deep concern etched on his face. He clearly had not expected to find her here, free. "Lyra," he breathed, his voice a gruff whisper, thick with surprise. His eyes swept over her disheveled state, the desperate energy radiating from her. "What are you doing out here? You are supposed to be confined." He lowered his hand from his sword, his posture relaxing only slightly, replaced by intense questioning scrutiny. Unspoken questions and suspicions hummed between them. Lyra saw the conflict in his kind, dark eyes, the struggle between duty and the unease that gnawed at him for weeks. This was her chance, the opening she had prayed for. "I escaped," she stated plainly, her voice gaining fragile strength. "I have to warn the king. He is in grave danger, Gareth, more than you can imagine." She extended her hand. The luminous tears of prophecy glinted in the dim light, catching his gaze like a magnet. The icy sculptures pulsed with a faint, otherworldly glow. Gareth's eyes widened further, fixed on the crystalline tears. He had heard whispers of her visions, of the king's rejection. Nothing prepared him for this tangible, glowing proof. "What are those?" he asked, his voice barely a murmur, laced with bewildered awe. He reached out, his calloused fingers hovering inches from the tears. Curiosity overcame his caution. Lyra felt a surge of desperate hope. He was listening. He was not immediately dismissing her as mad. Dust and old stone mingled with the faint metallic scent of his armor, creating a pungent cocktail of their tense moment. She knew she had to choose her words carefully. She needed to cut through years of skepticism and courtly whispers. "They are my tears, Gareth," she explained, her voice trembling. "The elixir Seraphina forced me to drink did not cure me. It changed me. It turned my visions into these. They are proof, solid, irrefutable proof of the betrayal surrounding our king." She gently urged his hand forward, pressing a single intricate tear into his palm. The cold shock made him flinch, but he did not drop it. He cradled it, his eyes fixed on its luminous depths. The crystalline tear shimmered, and within its heart, a fleeting image began to form. Gareth gasped, a sharp, choked sound. He saw it, a blurred image, then clearer, of Seraphina. Her beautiful face twisted into a calculating sneer, devoid of its usual grace. Her emerald eyes held a cold, predatory glint. She was not alone. Behind her, a shadowed man, his face obscured by a hood, passed her something small and gleaming. A dagger. Its hilt was ornate, familiar. It was one of the king's ceremonial blades, but this one bore a faint, dark stain. Then the vision flickered, dissolved, leaving only the tear in his hand. His grip tightened, knuckles white. The tear's weight felt immense, crushing. The implication of his vision crashed over him like a tidal wave. Seraphina, the king's fiancée, the woman he was ordered to protect, to trust. The subtle irregularities in the supply chain, the strange shipments of rare herbs he had uncovered, the sudden disappearance of loyal palace staff. All the pieces, once disconnected, snapped together with terrifying clarity. He had dismissed Lyra's warnings, believing Seraphina's smooth words. A sickening lurch filled his stomach. He had been a fool. "Impossible," he whispered, his voice raspy, a raw sound of disbelief and dawning horror. He looked up at Lyra, his face pale, his kind eyes wide with terror. "She wouldn't. She is to be our queen." The words sounded hollow, even to his own ears. The image in the tear had been too clear, too visceral. He could almost feel the cold steel of the dagger, the chill of Seraphina's gaze. The palace's ancient stones seemed to hum with the truth of Lyra's ignored warnings. The air grew heavy, suffocating with the weight of the revelation. "She would, Gareth," Lyra said, her voice now firm, resolute, all fear replaced by urgent conviction. "She has played a long, dangerous game. The king's life, our kingdom, they hang by a thread. That dagger, it is meant for Alaric, and soon." Her amethyst eyes pierced him, demanding he believe, demanding he act. He saw not a madwoman, but a prophetess, broken but unyielding, burdened by a terrible truth. Cold sweat trickled down his back, a stark contrast to the burning shame in his chest. He remembered Alaric's growing fatigue, his dismissive nature towards palace accidents. He remembered Seraphina's calm reassurances, her soothing touch, her quiet redirection of the king's attention. It had all been a performance, a masterful deception, and he, Sir Gareth, had been blind. He, sworn protector, had allowed this viper into the palace heart. A profound sense of failure washed over him, quickly followed by fierce, protective rage. His loyalty, once fragmented by doubt, now solidified into unwavering resolve. The banquet, he muttered, the word a sudden, chilling realization. It begins soon. She will make her move tonight. He looked at the glowing tear in his hand, then back at Lyra. A new understanding shone in his dark eyes. You have been right all along. Forgive me, Lyra, for my blindness. The apology was raw, heartfelt, carrying the weight of his guilt. Lyra simply nodded, her gaze fixed on the immediate danger, the pressing need for action. There was no time for absolution, only for survival. We must reach him, she urged, her voice barely a whisper, her eyes already scanning the passage for the quickest route. His private study. He always retreats there before official functions, to gather his thoughts, to compose himself. Her knowledge of Alaric's habits was intimate, born of years of quiet observation and unspoken affection. The thought of him alone, vulnerable, sent a fresh wave of panic through her. She felt the chill of the tears in her hand, a constant reminder of the horrific images they contained. Gareth's jaw hardened, his previous weariness replaced by a surge of adrenaline and grim determination. He was a knight, a protector. He would not fail his king again. He would not allow this treachery to stand. He clutched the tear protectively, as if its icy truth would melt away if exposed to wrong hands. "Follow me, Paul," he commanded, his voice low and firm, echoing slightly. "I know a faster way, a secret route known only to a few. It leads directly to the antechamber of his study." He turned, his heavy boots making barely a sound as he moved with renewed purpose. Lyra did not hesitate. She gathered her tattered gown, its fabric brushing against the cold stone. The faint, sweet smell of roasting meats and expensive perfumes began to drift through the hidden passages, a stark contrast to their grim reality. The sounds of the palace awakening to festivities grew louder. Distant laughter, clinking goblets, melodic strains of a string ensemble. Each sound was a cruel reminder of the ticking clock, of innocent merriment soon shattered by betrayal. She followed Gareth, her muscles screaming, her lungs burning, but her heart pulsed with furious, desperate hope. The glowing tears in her hand were her shield, her weapon, her proof. They were the only things that could save Alaric, that could save the Wolf Kingdom. They raced through the twisting passages, a silent, urgent blur against flickering torchlight. Every shadow seemed to reach for them. Every creak of the ancient palace felt like a warning. Their heavy, uneven breathing filled the confined space. Together, Lyra and Sir Gareth sped through the heart of the obsidian palace. Two lone figures against a tide of unseen enemies. They raced towards King Alaric's private study, knowing time was running out as the royal banquet was about to begin. The heavy oak door to King Alaric's private study splintered inward with a deafening crash, scattering wood splinters across the polished stone floor. Lyra stumbled into the sudden, warm light, Sir Gareth's broad hand steadying her for a moment before he moved to flank her. The air, thick with the scent of old parchment and the king's pipe tobacco, now also held the sharp tang of fear and urgency. King Alaric, who had been leaning back in his grand, carved chair by a crackling fireplace, his arm casually draped around Lady Seraphina Sterling, lurched forward. His piercing gray eyes narrowed in furious disbelief. Seraphina, perfectly composed even at the sudden intrusion, merely tilted her head, a faint, inquiring smile playing on her lips. Lyra's breath hitched in her throat, the bitter taste of the elixir still clinging to her tongue, a constant reminder of the torment she had endured. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat urging her forward. She had risked everything for this moment. "What in the blazes is the meaning of this, Gareth?" King Alaric's voice boomed, laced with an ice-cold fury that made the very air vibrate. "And Lyra, by the ancestors, have you truly lost your mind completely? To burst into my private chambers unannounced, Lyra flinched, the king's harsh words like physical blows, but her grip tightened on the small, shimmering cluster of frozen tears in her hand. She had to be strong now. She had to make him see. Sir Gareth stepped forward, placing himself slightly before Lyra, a silent shield. Your Majesty, with the deepest apologies, but there was no other choice. It is a matter of gravest importance, one that could not wait. His voice was gruff, devoid of its usual respectful deference, betraying the sheer desperation that had propelled them here. Seraphina's smile remained, but her emerald eyes flickered, a momentary, almost imperceptible, hardening in their depths. Lyra pushed past Sir Gareth, her silver hair, wild and unbound, catching the firelight like a halo. Her amethyst eyes, usually deep pools of sorrow, now blazed with a fierce, desperate resolve. Your Majesty, you are in grave danger. Her voice, though trembling, cut through the king's anger with an unexpected clarity. The shadow blight still grows, but I have proof, tangible proof. She extended her hand, the cluster of glistening crystalline tears held out like an offering. Alaric stared at her hand, then at her face, then back at the tears. They pulsed with a faint, internal luminescence, refracting the firelight into 1,000 tiny rainbows. He had never seen anything like them. His anger, though still simmering, began to mingle with a profound confusion. Seraphina, sensing a shift, rose gracefully from her seat, her elegant movements betraying no hint of alarm. Oh, Your Majesty, Lyra has escaped her confinement. This is truly tragic. She needs help, not to be indulged in these fantasies. Her voice was a soothing balm, designed to dispel the strangeness Lyra presented. Lyra ignored Seraphina, her gaze locked onto Alaric's face. These are the tears of prophecy, Your Majesty. They are my sight, made real. The elixir she forced upon me did not cure me. It transformed my gift. She felt a fresh wave of pain, a phantom burning in her throat at the memory of the foul potion. But the pain only fueled her urgency. She needed him to believe her, now more than ever. Alaric's brow furrowed, his gaze still fixed on the luminous tears. The light from them seemed to draw him in, defying his skepticism. He could feel a strange cold radiating from them, even from across the room. He had dismissed her prophecies before, seen her passion as madness, her tears as weakness. But these were different. They were not liquid, nor ice, but something else entirely, humming with an arcane energy that even he, a king of the wolf kingdom, could sense. Proof, Alaric repeated, the word a question, laced with doubt but also a burgeoning curiosity. He rose slowly, his towering figure casting a long shadow across the room. He moved towards Lyra, his eyes never leaving the shimmering crystals. Sir Gareth tensed, ready for any sudden move, his hand instinctively going to the hilt of his sword. Seraphina, a subtle shift in her posture, subtly positioned herself to intervene if necessary. As Alaric drew closer, the details within the tears became clearer. Each one was a tiny, intricate sculpture, a miniature world trapped in crystalline ice. Lyra held them steady, her fingers aching from the cold, but her resolve unyielding. Look closely, Your Majesty, she urged, her voice barely above a whisper, filled with the raw emotion of a desperate plea. Look into their depths and see the truth. Alaric hesitated for a long moment, his gaze sweeping from Lyra's intense, pleading eyes to the shimmering, unnatural tears. His mind rebelled, fought against the idea that the woman he was to marry, the woman he trusted implicitly, could be anything but loyal. Yet the sheer conviction in Lyra's gaze, the tangible strangeness of the tears, tugged at a thread of unease within him. He reached out a hand slowly, almost reluctantly, taking the cluster of tears from Lyra's grasp. The cold was immediate, a shocking, deep chill that seemed to penetrate to his very bones, bypassing the warmth of the room. He held them in his palm, feeling their delicate weight, marveling at their strange, static glow. As he brought them closer to his eyes, the light within them intensified, and he saw it. A flicker, a fleeting image within one of the larger crystals. It was Seraphina, her face alight with a cruel, triumphant smile, speaking in hushed tones with a cloaked figure he recognized as Lord Valerius, one of his most trusted advisors, whom Seraphina had recently championed. The scene vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving him with a jolt. He blinked, shaking his head slightly, attributing it to the strange light. to Lyra's madness, to a trick of his own tired eyes. He rotated the cluster of tears, his gaze sweeping across their crystalline surfaces. Another image shimmered into view, stark and horrifying. It was a goblet, identical to the one he used for his nightly draught of wine, but within the tears a viscous, dark liquid swirled, and as he watched, a tiny spectral hand, distinctly Seraphina's, tipped a vial into its depths. His breath caught in his throat. Disbelief warred fiercely with a dawning, sickening horror. He felt a cold dread begin to coil in his stomach. Seraphina's sweet voice broke the silence, cutting through the rising tension. Your Majesty, please do not let her sorcery infect your noble mind. This poor girl is truly ill. These are nothing but dark enchantments, designed to confuse and mislead you. Her words were perfectly pitched, a careful blend of concern and warning. Lyra felt a chill that had nothing to do with the tears in Alaric's hand. Seraphina's composure was terrifying. But Alaric was no longer listening to Seraphina. His eyes were fixed on the tears, his grip tightening. He saw another flash, the palace courtyard, but transformed. The grand fountain cracked and dry, and in its place a grotesque, gnarled tree, its branches reaching like skeletal claws into a sickly gray skimpa. The shadow blight tree, Lyra's impossible prophecy, made real. The image sent a tremor through him, shaking the very foundations of his rational world. Then a final devastating vision. Himself lying prone, lifeless, at the foot of his own throne, with Seraphina standing over him, her beautiful face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated triumph, a crown resting uneasily on her golden hair. A gasp tore from his lips. The cold dread became a suffocating wave of terror. The images were brief, fragmented, but they built upon each other with an undeniable, horrifying coherence. They spoke of betrayal, of poison, of usurpation. The meticulously crafted facade of his peaceful reign crumbled around him. His mind reeled. Seraphina, the woman he loved, the woman he had chosen to be his queen. It simply could not be true. Yet the evidence, cold and shimmering in his palm, was undeniable. He looked up, his gray eyes, once full of anger, now wide with a profound, aching betrayal, meeting Lyra's. In her eyes, he saw not madness, but a deep, selfless sorrow, a reflection of the pain he now felt. A slow, burning rage began to simmer beneath the surface of his shock. He had dismissed her, scorned her, and all the while she had been trying to save him. Seraphina, watching Alaric's face, saw the color drain from it, saw his eyes change from disbelief to dawning horror, and a flicker of panic crossed her own serene features. Her carefully constructed world, her perfect plan, was unraveling before her very eyes. Her eyes darted from the tears in Alaric's hand to Lyra's defiant face. The stakes were too high. She had to act. "This is an abomination," Seraphina shrieked, her voice suddenly devoid of its honeyed sweetness, replaced by a sharp, venomous edge. "She is a sorceress, a witch, trying to deceive your Majesty with dark magic." With a sudden, swift movement, she lunged forward, her hand outstretched, not towards Alaric, but directly at Lyra, aiming to snatch the cluster of shimmering tears that had exposed her. The air crackled with desperate, violent intent. Seraphina's manicured hand, adorned with glittering rings, shot out like a serpent, striking, aiming for the fragile crystals in Lyra's grasp. Lyra instinctively recoiled, clutching the tears of prophecy tighter against her chest, the cold, smooth surfaces pressing into her skin through her thin gown. A sharp, desperate gasp escaped Lyra's lips. These were not just tears, they were her entire truth, the very essence of her agony made manifest. She could not, would not, allow them to be shattered. King Alaric, caught between their sudden, violent movements, watched the shimmering evidence of his world crumbling. His gray eyes, seconds ago filled with a bewildered suspicion, now focused intently on the fleeting images within the crystalline tears Lyra held so fiercely. He saw Seraphina's beautiful, composed face twisted in a silent, venomous sneer, planning. He saw the gleam of a slender, hidden dagger. He saw a shadowed figure pouring a dark, viscous liquid into a chalice. A cold dread began to seep into his bones, chilling him more deeply than any winter storm. "No, you cannot touch them," Lyra pleaded, her voice a raw whisper, barely audible above the rising tension. Her body trembled, not from fear, but from the fierce resolve to protect this last vestige of her sanity and his safety. She felt the vibrations of the cold stone floor beneath her bare feet, connecting her to the deep, silent pulse of the ancient palace. The air in the study thickened, heavy with unspoken accusations and the sharp metallic tang of impending conflict. Seraphina's emerald eyes, usually so serene, now flared with a desperate, calculating fire, reflecting the dim glow of the flickering fireplace. Sir Gareth, always a silent sentinel, moved with a sudden, decisive grace that belied his usual stoicism. He stepped forward, placing his broad frame between Lyra and Seraphina, his hands subtly resting on the hilt of his sword. His dark, kind eyes, usually filled with worry, now held a glint of steel. "Stand back, Lady Seraphina," his voice rumbled, low and steady, a stark contrast to the frantic energy that now filled the room. His presence was a solid wall, a shield that allowed Lyra a precious moment to breathe, to understand that she was not alone in this desperate fight for truth. The interruption gave King Alaric the crucial seconds he needed. The tears, held slightly aloft by Lyra's protective stance, caught the light from the tall windows in the hearth, revealing their secrets with agonizing clarity. He saw a map of the palace, lines converging on his own chambers, marked with treacherous symbols. He saw faces, familiar and trusted, now shadowed by deceit. Each image was a hammer blow to his faith, shattering the carefully constructed facade Seraphina had woven around him. The metallic taste of betrayal filled his mouth, acrid and sickening. His mind raced, piecing together fragments he had dismissed. The accidents, the whispered rumors, Sir Gareth's subtle questions, Lyra's desperate, tearful warnings. Seraphina's gentle smiles now seemed like cruel caricatures, her comforting words laced with poison. He remembered Lyra's raw agony, her silver hair disheveled, her amethyst eyes pleading, and the dismissive way he had pushed her away, believing her mad. A wave of profound regret, sharp and cold, washed over him, turning his stomach. He had been a blind fool, led astray by beauty and false affection. Seraphina let out a frustrated hiss, her composure finally cracking around the edges. "This is sorcery, Your Majesty," she spat, her voice losing its honeyed sweetness, revealing a harsh underlying edge. "These are mere tricks, conjured by a deranged mind to sow discord. She wishes to destroy our union, to usurp my place." She tried to bypass Sir Gareth, a desperate lunge towards Lyra, her fingers still clawing for the tears. Lyra flinched, instinctively pressing further behind Sir Gareth, the cold crystals digging into her hand, a constant reminder of the painful truth they held. Sir Gareth, unmoving, merely shifted his weight, blocking Seraphina's path with quiet authority. His gaze, usually respectful, was now cold and unyielding. "The evidence speaks for itself, Lady Seraphina," he stated, his voice devoid of emotion, yet carrying the weight of his years of loyalty and observation. He had seen enough, heard enough, felt enough unease to know the truth when it stood before him, crystalline and undeniable. He felt the tremor in Lyra's hand against his arm, a fragile strength that had endured so much. King Alaric's breath hitched in his throat as he witnessed another vision within the tears. Himself, lying prone and still, a crown askew on his head, his face pale and lifeless. The sight was a stark, brutal blow, a future he had so narrowly avoided. His hand clenched into a tight fist, his knuckles turning white. The initial shock gave way to a searing, righteous fury, a fire that ignited in his core and spread rapidly through his veins. His powerful frame, usually so regal and controlled, now vibrated with raw, unrestrained anger. He finally spoke, his voice low and dangerous, each word a stone dropped into a deep well. "Enough." The single word cut through the charged atmosphere, silencing Seraphina's frantic accusations. King Alaric's face, once handsome and open, now hardened into a mask of grim resolve. His jaw was tight, his lips a thin, unforgiving line. The betrayal had not just touched his life, it had pierced the very heart of his kingdom, threatening to tear it asunder. He felt the cold touch of Lyra's truth, the weight of her suffering, in the depth of his own blindness. He stepped towards Lyra, his gaze unwavering, finally meeting her amethyst eyes, which were brimming with unshed tears. This time there was no dismissal, no doubt, only a profound, wrenching understanding. He reached out, not to take the tears, but to gently touch Lyra's hand, his fingers warm against her cold skin. The contact sent a jolt through Lyra, a recognition, a connection finally forged after so much isolation and pain. He then slowly lowered his hand, his eyes still fixed on the crystalline evidence, letting the images sear themselves into his memory. So it was not madness, Alaric murmured, more to himself than to anyone else, his voice laced with a bitter irony. It was truth. He turned his piercing gaze towards Seraphina, his eyes now like chips of granite, utterly devoid of the affection he had once shown her. The transformation was absolute, terrifying in its swiftness. The man who had been easily swayed, who had dismissed Lyra, was gone, replaced by a king whose fury was cold and absolute. He saw Seraphina's false smile, her feigned concern, all as part of a calculated performance to bring about his ruin. Seraphina, seeing the undeniable certainty in Alaric's eyes, understood that her carefully crafted charade had finally collapsed. The gentle slope of her shoulders stiffened. Her perpetually serene expression began to warp, twisting into something cruel and predatory. Her emerald eyes narrowed, losing all pretense of innocence, reflecting the true venomous depths of her ambition. The mask she had worn for so long, the one that had charmed an entire court, shattered into 1,000 pieces. She looked at Lyra with pure, undiluted hatred, a look that promised retribution. A chilling, unhinged laugh escaped Seraphina's throat, low and guttural at first, then rising in intensity, echoing ominously through the ancient study. It was not a laugh of mirth, but one of bitter defiance, of a cornered predator revealing its true fangs. "You fools," she hissed, her voice dripping with scorn, her golden braids seeming to shimmer with malevolence. "You truly believe a few pretty crystals could stop what has already been set in motion?" Her gaze swept over Alaric, Lyra, and Sir Gareth, filled with a terrifying confidence, a chilling certainty of her impending victory. As her laughter faded, a faint grinding sound began, deep beneath the stone floor. It grew louder, accompanied by a heavy thud, as if massive hidden mechanisms had been engaged. Then, with a sudden violent splintering of ancient wood and a shower of dust and stone, the secret panels lining the study walls burst inwards. Through the gaping holes, a phalanx of armed guards, their faces grim and their weapons drawn, poured into the room, their heavy boots striking the marble floor with a synchronized, ominous cadence. They were Seraphina's hidden army, and they had arrived. The king's study exploded with chaos as Seraphina's chilling laugh echoed through the room. Dark figures bearing a sinister sigil poured in when the heavy door splintered. King Alaric drew his broadsword, his face set in furious resolve. Sir Gareth already stood before Lyra, weapon drawn, shielding her. Lyra clutched the cold tears of prophecy, a desperate anchor in the storm. The air thickened with metallic tang and shouts. Alaric roared, a silver blur of motion, each strike purposeful. Lyra's heart pounded, a brutal rhythm against her ribs. The horrifying vision of the king's demise flashed again, pushing her to guide him, to avert the coming darkness. Sir Gareth, a solid shield of loyalty, stood firm before Lyra, deflecting blows meant for her. His movements were effective, his shield absorbing impacts. Lyra pressed against the cold stone, the tears still gripped tight. The elixir sharpened Lyra's senses, the chaos unfolding with agonizing clarity. She saw not just the physical movements, but the cold intent behind them. "Behind you, my king!" Lyra's voice cut through the din. Alaric turned, blocking a sneak attack from a cloaked figure emerging from a bookshelf. He stumbled, but recovered, his gray eyes flashing gratitude. He trusted her warnings now, a stark contrast to the dismissive disbelief that had once clouded his judgment. A fragile warmth of hope flickered within Lyra. He was listening. Seraphina watched from the edge of the fight, her serene smile now a cold, predatory sneer. Her emerald eyes held calculated cruelty. She directed her conspirators with subtle gestures, guiding them to the king's vulnerable spots. Lyra felt cold dread creep up her spine, Serafina conducted this chaos with chilling precision. A scarred man broke free, lunging for Lyra. Sir Gareth, entangled, could not turn. Lyra's breath caught, a vision of herself falling and the tears scattering flashed. "Below the tapestry! Gareth!" she cried, pointing. Gareth parried, kicked one assailant, then intercepted the scarred man. He crashed into the tapestry, revealing a hidden alcove. "How did you know?" the man mumbled, before Gareth knocked him unconscious. Lyra herself did not quite know how she knew. The knowledge had simply bloomed in her mind, a sudden, undeniable certainty. The elixir sharpened her perception. King Alaric fought like a wolf, parrying thrusts and tripping attackers. Lyra saw the fatigue etching onto his features, lines deepening. She worried for him, a deep, aching fear intertwining with her fierce loyalty. Serafina watched Alaric struggle, a faint smirk on her lips. Lyra sensed a deeper, more destructive pleasure in her eyes, beyond just a throne. "The chandelier, Alaric! The chain!" Lyra shouted, seeing a conspirator climbing to reach it. Alaric spun, cleaving the thick chain. The chandelier crashed, missing him by inches, and the saboteur tumbled down. The king's loyal guards now looked to Lyra for direction. She felt their desperate hope. Taking a breath, she focused her visions into instructions. Each tear of prophecy pulsed with a faint light, mirroring the frantic beat of her own heart. "Guard on the left, Alaric! Feigning injury!" she called. Alaric narrowed his eyes, then kicked the man's sword away, revealing a concealed dagger. He disarmed the snarling traitor. Lyra's gift was turning the tide. Sir Gareth, clearing more of Serafina's men, glanced at Lyra with a silent nod of respect. His skepticism had vanished. He believed in her completely. The numbers were still formidable, but the tide slowly turned. Alaric's men, galvanized by his leadership and Lyra's warnings, fought with renewed vigor. Lyra felt their resolve, a steady hum of loyalty that contrasted sharply with the bitter taste of betrayal. She wanted to weep with relief and fear all at once. Serafina, seeing her plans unravel, let out a frustrated cry. Her facade of calm elegance shattered, revealing a raw, desperate anger. She moved towards the king, her hand slipping into her gown. Lyra's vision sharpened, a sickening premonition washing over her. A flash of polished steel, then the king's agonizing pain. "She has a blade, Alaric. She means to strike you," Lyra screamed, but chaos swallowed her words. Two guards threw themselves at Alaric, forcing him to engage. Serafina moved with startling speed, a small, wickedly sharp dagger emerging from her sleeve. Its tip gleamed with an unnatural, sickly green hue. Poison. "The green blade! It is poisoned!" Lyra shrieked, her voice cracking. She stumbled forward, the tears burning in her hand. Alaric heard Lyra's frantic cry. He spun, seeing Serafina, blade raised, aimed at his side. He realized Lyra's gift was real, that his kingdom, his life, had truly hung by a thread of his own disbelief. The bitter truth was a cold taste in his mouth. He tried to bring his own blade to bear, but Serafina lunged, triumph in her eyes. Alaric tried to block, too slow. Lyra's scream echoed, a raw sound of pure anguish, as a single crystalline tear of prophecy slipped from her trembling fingers and shattered on the stone floor. Serafina's eyes, wide with murderous intent, met the king's. Her lips curled into a triumphant smile. This was it. The blade arced towards the king. A blur of silver and steel intervened. Sir Gareth, abandoning his opponent, deflected the poisoned dagger with a sharp clang. Gareth's intervention bought precious seconds. Alaric disentangled his sword, disarmed Serafina, and the poisoned dagger clattered uselessly. Serafina staggered back, eyes wide with shock and fury. The king's loyal guards, seeing the near-fatal blow, quickly overwhelmed the remaining conspirators. The sounds of battle began to subside, replaced by heavy breathing and the moans of the defeated. King Alaric, breathing heavily, stared at Serafina. His gray eyes held anger and deep disappointment. The magnitude of her betrayal, the cold, calculating nature of her plot, was a bitter realization. He moved towards her, his footsteps deliberate and heavy, like the tolling of a funeral band. Serafina backed away, her composure finally crumbling. "You tried to kill me," Alaric growled, his voice low and dangerous. He cornered her against an oak desk. Her usual cunning glint vanished from her eyes, replaced by a desperate, trapped fear. There was no escape. Seraphina's face contorted, a mask of desperate fury replacing her fear. Her eyes darted, seeking any way to strike back. They landed on a small letter opener on the desk. In a final, desperate act of defiance, a last surge of malicious intent, she snatched the letter opener. With a guttural cry, fueled by a terrifying, unhinged rage, she lunged at King Alaric's throat. "No!" Lyra screamed, her voice tearing through the sudden silence. A single sharp cry tore through the chamber, a desperate sound ripped from Lyra's throat. It was a raw, primal warning cutting through the clash of steel and the shouts of men. King Alaric froze, his eyes snapping to Lyra, the name Seraphina still a hiss on his lips. In that fraction of a second, the world seemed to hold its breath. Seraphina, her face a mask of pure venom, lunged. The poisoned blade, glinting wickedly, arced towards Alaric's unprotected side. Lyra's heart leaped into her throat, a cold dread seizing her. She knew this moment, had seen its shadow in 100 fractured visions. Sir Gareth, his battle-hardened senses honed by instinct, reacted with astonishing speed. The knight had been moving to intercept one of Seraphina's remaining guards, but Lyra's piercing shriek ripped him from his focus. He saw the glint of the dagger, the furious intent in Seraphina's eyes, and the king's momentary paralysis. With a guttural roar, Gareth spun, his own sword a blur. It met Seraphina's blade with a deafening clang, sending sparks dancing through the dusty air. The impact vibrated through the floorboards, a shockwave in the sudden, tense silence. Seraphina staggered back, her eyes wide with frustrated rage. The venomous intent of her attack thwarted. The blade clattered from her grasp, skittering across the polished stone floor. The loyal guards, galvanized by Gareth's swift action and the king's narrow escape, moved as one. Seraphina found herself surrounded, her golden hair disheveled, her mask of composure finally shattered. She spat a curse, her emerald eyes blazing with fury, but resistance was futile. Hands seized her, binding her wrists with rough rope. Her hidden guards, now leaderless and exposed, faltered. The king's loyalists, fueled by righteous anger at the betrayal, quickly overwhelmed them. The last of Seraphina's conspirators were disarmed, their weapons clattering to the ground in a dissonant symphony of defeat. The air in the study, thick with the metallic tang of blood and the acrid scent of fear, slowly began to clear. Lyra sagged against the heavy oak desk, her knees threatening to give way. The adrenaline that had surged through her veins now receded, leaving her trembling, utterly spent. Her breath hitched in her chest, each inhale a sharp pain. The image of that poisoned blade so close to Alaric was seared into her mind. She squeezed her eyes shut, a wave of nausea washing over her. The battle had been fierce, chaotic, a blur of motion and desperate cries, but it was over. The silence that descended felt heavy, thick with the weight of what had almost been. She opened her eyes to see Seraphina, bound and furious, being dragged from the room. Her glare, even in defeat, held a promise of future malice, a cold, unwavering hatred that sent a shiver down Lyra's spine. King Alaric stood, his shoulders heaving, his gaze fixed on the doorway where Seraphina had vanished. The anger that had fueled his fight now drained away, replaced by a profound weariness. He looked at Gareth, then at Lyra, a complicated mix of emotions swirling in his gray eyes. The betrayal cut deep, a gaping wound in his trust. But Lyra's warning, her unwavering belief in her visions, had saved him. He took a hesitant step towards her, his expression contorted with unspoken apologies, and a gratitude that bordered on reverence. Lyra watched him, her own heart a tumultuous sea of relief and lingering terror. Her body ached, her head throbbed, but the overwhelming feeling was the sheer, brutal joy that he was safe. Just as the last of the defeated conspirators were led away, a low rumble started deep beneath the palace. It was faint at first, a distant growl, but it quickly intensified. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble, sending tremors through the ancient stones. Dust rained down from the ceiling, obscuring the tapestries and blurring the edges of the room. The flickering torchlight danced wildly, casting grotesque shadows that seemed to writhe on the walls. Lyra gasped, clutching at the desk for support. Her heightened senses, still reeling from the elixir, picked up a strange, earthy scent mingling with the dust and fear, a scent of decay and ancient earth. The rumble grew into a terrifying roar, and then a deafening crack echoed from the courtyard outside. The sound tore through the palace, a sound of massive stone breaking apart. A collective gasp rose from the few remaining loyal guards. Alaric, his face etched with concern, rushed to the tall, arched window overlooking the central courtyard. Lyra, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, followed, her eyes wide with dawning recognition. She knew this too. This was the final, terrifying piece of her prophecy, the ultimate vindication of her sanity. Through the dust and the fading light of the courtyard, a grotesque form began to emerge. The paving stones in the center of the courtyard, ancient and thick, erupted with a violent surge. Jagged pieces of masonry flew outwards as something dark and twisted clawed its way into the open air. It was a tree, but unlike any tree Lara had ever seen in the natural world. Its trunk was gnarled and thick, black as obsidian, its branches like skeletal fingers reaching toward the bruised sky. The leaves, what few there were a sickly, dark green that seemed to absorb the light, leaving a void in its place. A chilling aura of decay, of slow, creeping death, emanated from it. This was the shadow blight tree. It stood there, a terrible, silent testament to the averted doom, a physical manifestation of the corruption that had almost consumed the kingdom. Its presence was overwhelming, a stark and horrifying beauty. Lyra felt a wave of profound sorrow wash over her, a deep ache for the innocent life this tree represented, the life that would have been choked out by its insidious roots had her warnings gone unheeded. She looked at Alaric, his face pale, his eyes wide, with a mixture of terror and dawning comprehension. The prophecy, once dismissed as madness, now stood before them, undeniable. King Alaric turned from the window, his gaze finding Lyra's. All the anger, the doubt, the dismissal he had shown her evaporated, replaced by an overwhelming tide of remorse and gratitude. He saw not a mad woman, not a troublesome prophetess, but the woman who had stood against the darkness, alone and reviled, to save his life and his kingdom. He walked towards her slowly, each step heavy with unspoken regret. Lyra felt her own tears welling up, not of sorrow this time, but of a profound, heart-wrenching relief. The burden she had carried for so long, the crushing weight of her unheeded visions, finally began to lift. He reached her, his large hands gently cupping her face. His touch was warm, reassuring, a stark contrast to the cold isolation she had endured for so long. His thumb brushed beneath her eye, wiping away a tear that had just escaped. "Lyra," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion, his gray eyes glistening. "My Lyra." The words were simple, yet they held the weight of an entire world. They were an apology, a promise, a confession of his own blindness. Lyra leaned into his touch, a soft swoop escaping her lips. The ache in her chest, so long a constant companion, began to ease. He pulled her closer then, wrapping his powerful arms around her in a fierce, protective embrace. Lyra buried her face in his shoulder, the scent of him, leather, sweat, and something uniquely Alaric, filling her senses. It was a haven she had longed for, dreamed of, but never truly believed she would find again. Her body shook with the release of tension, of fear, of agonizing sorrow. She clung to him, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her ear, a rhythm of life and safety. He held her tight, his chin resting on her silver hair, and she could feel the tenderness that still ran through his own body, a testament to the ordeal they had both endured. "Forgive me," Alaric murmured, his voice thick with regret. "I was a fool. I let her poison my mind, blind me to your truth." He pulled back slightly, his gaze searching hers, his eyes filled with a desperate plea for understanding. "You sacrificed everything, Lyra. Your sanity, your reputation, your freedom, all, to warn me." He shook his head, a deep sigh escaping his lips. "And I repaid you with doubt and imprisonment." The self-reproach in his voice was raw, palpable. He still tasted the bitterness of his own folly, the arrogance that had nearly cost him his life and his throne. Lyra looked up at him, her amethyst eyes still brimming with unshed tears, but a faint, tremulous smile touched her lips. "It is forgiven, Alaric," she whispered, her voice still hoarse. The shadow blight, it was so strong. She knew he truly saw her now, truly understood. That was all she had ever wanted. The weight of his trust finally placed upon her felt like a balm to her wounded soul. It was a silent conversation, a profound reconciliation that transcended words. The touch, the calm, the shared understanding of the nightmare they had navigated together spoke volume. Later that day, after the remaining conspirators had been rounded up and secured, King Alaric convened a hastily called council. The court, still reeling from the sudden eruption of the shadow blight tree in the central courtyard and the revelation of Seraphina's treachery, gathered in a stunned silence. Alaric stood before them, his presence radiating a newfound authority, an absolute certainty born from facing the brink of disaster. Sir Gareth stood staunchly by his side, his face grim but resolute. Lyra stood quietly just behind Alaric, her silver hair unbound, her eyes still holding a haunting depth. Alaric spoke with a voice that commanded attention, a voice that carried the weight of a king who had seen the truth unveiled in the most dramatic fashion. He recounted the events, sparing no detail of Seraphina's deception, his own blindness, and Lyra's unwavering warnings. He spoke of the elixir, the forced consumption, and the miracle of the tears of prophecy. As he spoke, his gaze swept over the stunned faces of his courtiers, some pale with shock, others with shame for their own complicity in dismissing Lyra. "She saved this kingdom," Alaric declared, his voice ringing through the hall. He turned to Lyra, his hand reaching out to gently rest on her shoulder. "Lyra Thorne, once scorned, once confined, is the true guardian of this realm. Her tears, once thought a sign of madness, are now sacred. They are the purest manifestation of a divine gift that averted our utter ruin." He looked back at his court, his gaze sweeping over each person. "From this day forward, she is not merely a prophetess. She is my most trusted advisor, the voice of foresight, the heart of our vigilance." A ripple went through the court, a mix of awe and trepidation. The old prejudices, the whispered rumors, crumbled in the face of the king's absolute conviction and the undeniable evidence of the shadow blight tree, visible through the palace windows. Lyra felt a warmth spread through her chest. It was not triumph, not vengeance, but a deep, abiding peace. Her path had been hard, fraught with pain and isolation, but it had led her here to a place of acceptance and purpose. Her tears, once a source of humiliation and fear, were now revered. Her gift, once a burden, was now a strength. In the days that followed, the palace began to heal, though the scars remained. The shadow blight tree in the courtyard stood as a constant, stark reminder of the peril they had faced. Its gnarled branches, dark leaves, and aura of ancient sorrow were impossible to ignore. Many spoke of removing it, of cleansing the courtyard of such a disturbing presence, but Alaric refused. "Let it stand," he had said, his voice firm. "Let it remind us all of the price of blindness and the power of truth, however uncomfortable." Lyra found her place by Alaric's side, her visions now sought out, her words listened to with solemn respect. She still saw the future, sometimes in flashes, sometimes in the quiet introspection of her heart, and sometimes still in the shimmering depths of her crystalline tears. But the terror that had once accompanied her gift had lessened. She no longer fought against it. She embraced it, understood it as an integral part of who she was. The isolation had receded, replaced by a profound connection to Alaric and to the kingdom she served. One evening, Lyra stood with Alaric in the high windows overlooking the courtyard. The moon cast long, eerie shadows from the shadow blight tree, its dark silhouette stark against the night sky. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and the distant murmur of the palace. Lyra leaned her head against Alaric's shoulder, a profound sense of calm settling over her. The turmoil of the past months, the years of misunderstanding, finally found their quiet resolution. Her heart, once so burdened by unshared visions and unspoken pain, finally found its peace. The shadow blight tree remained, a dark, silent sentinel, forever etched into the heart of the obsidian palace, a symbol of the averted doom and the enduring strength of truth. What would you have done? One line in the comments? Let's argue it out together. Where did the story catch you? Which scene made you stop and think, a small like is a small move, but it's a big support for this channel? See you in the next story. Subscribe so you don't miss it. A single sharp cry tore through the chamber, a desperate sound ripped from Lyra's throat. It was a raw, primal warning cutting through the clash of steel and the shouts of men. King Alaric froze, his eyes snapping to Lyra, the name Seraphina still a hiss on his lips. In that fraction of a second, the world seemed to hold its breath. Seraphina, her face a mask of pure venom, lunged. The poisoned blade, glinting wickedly, arced toward Alaric's unprotected side. Lyra's heart leaped into her throat, a cold dread seizing her. She knew this moment, had seen its shadow in 100 fractured visions. Sir Gareth, his battle-hardened senses honed by instinct, reacted with astonishing speed. The knight had been moving to intercept one of Seraphina's remaining guards, but Lyra's piercing shriek ripped him from his focus. He saw the glint of the dagger, the furious intent in Seraphina's eyes, and the king's momentary paralysis. With a guttural roar, Gareth spun, his own sword a blur. It met Seraphina's blade with a deafening clang, sending sparks dancing through the dusty air. The impact vibrated through the floorboards, a shockwave in the sudden, tense silence. Seraphina staggered back, her eyes wide with frustrated rage, the venomous intent of her attack thwarted. The blade clattered from her grasp, skittering across the polished stone floor. The loyal guards, galvanized by Gareth's swift action and the king's narrow escape, moved as one. Seraphina found herself surrounded, her golden hair disheveled, her mask of composure finally shattered. She spat a curse, her emerald eyes blazing with fury, but resistance was futile. Hands seized her, binding her wrists with rough rope. Her hidden guards, now leaderless and exposed, faltered. The king's loyalists, fueled by righteous anger at the betrayal, quickly overwhelmed them. The last of Seraphina's conspirators were disarmed, their weapons clattering to the ground in a dissonant symphony of defeat. The air in the study, thick with the metallic tang of blood and the acrid scent of fear, slowly began to clear. Lyra sagged against the heavy oak desk, her knees threatening to give way. The adrenaline that had surged through her veins now receded, leaving her trembling, utterly spent. Her breath hitching in her chest, each inhale a sharp pain. The image of that poisoned blade, so close to Alaric, was seared into her mind. She squeezed her eyes shut, a wave of nausea washing over her. The battle had been fierce, chaotic, a blur of motion and desperate cries, but it was over. The silence that descended felt heavy, thick with the weight of what had almost been. She opened her eyes to see Seraphina, bound and furious, being dragged from the room. Her glare, even in defeat, held a promise of future malice, a cold, unwavering hatred that sent a shiver down Lyra's spine. King Alaric stood, his shoulders heaving, his gaze fixed on the doorway where Seraphina had vanished. The anger that had fueled his fight now drained away, replaced by a profound weariness. He looked at Gareth, then at Lyra, a complicated mix of emotions swirling in his gray eyes. The betrayal cut deep, a gaping wound in his trust. But Lyra's warning, her unwavering belief in her visions, had saved him. He took a hesitant step towards her, his expression contorted with unspoken apologies and a gratitude that bordered on reverence. Lyra watched him, her own heart a tumultuous sea of relief and lingering terror. Her body ached, her head throbbed, but the overwhelming feeling was the sheer, brutal joy that he was safe. Just as the last of the defeated conspirators were led away, a low rumble started deep beneath the palace. It was faint at first, a distant growl, but it quickly intensified. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble, sending tremors through the ancient stones. Dust rained down from the ceiling, obscuring the tapestries and blurring the edges of the room. The flickering torchlight danced wildly, casting grotesque shadows that seemed to writhe on the walls. Lyra gasped, clutching at the desk for support. Her heightened senses, still reeling from the elixir, picked up a strange, earthy scent mingling with the dust and fear, a scent of decay and ancient earth. The rumble grew into a terrifying roar, and then a deafening crack echoed from the courtyard outside. The sound tore through the palace, a sound of massive stone breaking apart. A collective gasp rose from the few remaining loyal guards. Alaric, his face etched with concern, rushed to the tall, arched window overlooking the central courtyard. Lyra, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, followed, her eyes wide with dawning recognition. She knew this too. This was the final terrifying piece of her prophecy, the ultimate vindication of her sanity. Through the dust and the fading light of the courtyard, a grotesque form began to emerge. The paving stones in the center of the courtyard, ancient and thick, erupted with a violent surge. Jagged pieces of masonry flew outwards as something dark and twisted clawed its way into the open air. It was a tree, but unlike any tree Lyra had ever seen in the natural world. Its trunk was gnarled and thick, black as obsidian, its branches like skeletal fingers reaching towards the bruised sky. The leaves, what few there were a sickly, dark green that seemed to absorb the light, leaving a void in its place. A chilling aura of decay, of slow, creeping death, emanated from it. This was the shadow blight tree. It stood there, a terrible silent testament to the averted doom, a physical manifestation of the corruption that had almost consumed the kingdom. Its presence was overwhelming, a stark and horrifying beauty. Lyra felt a wave of profound sorrow wash over her, a deep ache for the innocent life this tree represented, the life that would have been choked out by its insidious roots had her warnings gone unheeded. She looked at Alaric, his face pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and dawning comprehension. The prophecy, once dismissed as madness, now stood before them, undeniable. King Alaric turned from the window, his gaze finding Lyra's. All the anger, the doubt, the dismissal he had shown her evaporated, replaced by an overwhelming tide of remorse and gratitude. He saw not a madwoman, not a troublesome prophetess, but the woman who had stood against the darkness, alone and reviled, to save his life and his kingdom. He walked towards her slowly, each step heavy with unspoken regret. Lyra felt her own tears welling up, not of sorrow this time, but of a profound, heart-wrenching relief. The burden she had carried for so long, the crushing weight of her unheeded visions, finally began to lift. He reached her, his large hands gently cupping her face. His touch was warm, reassuring, a stark contrast to the cold isolation she had endured for so long. His thumb brushed beneath her eye, wiping away a tear that had just escaped. "Lyra," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion, his gray eyes glistening. "My Lyra." The words were simple, yet they held the weight of an entire world. They were an apology, a promise, a confession of his own blindness. Lyra leaned into his touch, a soft sob escaping her lips. The ache in her chest, so long a constant companion, began to ease. He pulled her closer then, wrapping his powerful arms around her in a fierce, protective embrace. Lyra buried her face in his shoulder, the scent of him, leather, sweat, and something uniquely Alaric, filling her senses. It was a haven she had longed for, dreamed of, but never truly believed she would find again. Her body shook with the release of tension, of fear, of agonizing sorrow. She clung to him, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her ear, a rhythm of life and safety. He held her tight, his chin resting on her silver hair, and she could feel the tremors that still ran through his own body, a testament to the ordeal they had both endured. "Forgive me," Alaric murmured, his voice thick with regret. "I was a fool. I let her poison my mind, blind me to your truth." He pulled back slightly, his gaze searching hers, his eyes filled with a desperate plea for understanding. "You sacrificed everything, Lyra. Your sanity, your reputation, your freedom, all to warn me." He shook his head, a deep sigh escaping his lips. "And I repaid you with doubt and imprisonment." The self-reproach in his voice was raw, palpable. He still tasted the bitterness of his own folly, the arrogance that had nearly cost him his life and his throne. Lyra looked up at him, her amethyst eyes still brimming with unshed tears, but a faint, tremulous smile touched her lips. "It is forgiven, Alaric," she whispered, her voice still hoarse. "The shadow blight, it was so strong." She knew he truly saw her now, truly understood. That was all she had ever wanted. The weight of his trust, finally placed upon her, felt like a balm to her wounded soul. It was a silent conversation, a profound reconciliation that transcended words. The touch, the way, the shared understanding of the nightmare they had navigated together, spoke volumes. Later that day, after the remaining conspirators had been rounded up and secured, King Alaric convened a hastily called council. The court, still reeling from the sudden eruption of the shadow blight tree in the central courtyard and the revelation of Seraphina's treachery, gathered in a stunned silence. Alaric stood before them, his presence radiating a newfound authority, an absolute certainty born from facing the brink of disaster. Sir Gareth stood staunchly by his side, his face grim but resolute. Lyra stood quietly just behind Alaric, her silver hair unbound, her eyes still holding a haunting depth. Alaric spoke with a voice that commanded attention, a voice that carried the weight of a king who had seen the truth unveiled in the most dramatic fashion. He recounted the events, sparing no detail of Seraphina's deception, his own blindness, and Lyra's unwavering warnings. He spoke of the elixir, the forced consumption, and the miracle of the tears of prophecy. As he spoke, his gaze swept over the stunned faces of his courtiers, some pale with shock, others with shame for their own complicity in dismissing Lyra. "She saved this kingdom," Alaric declared, his voice ringing through the hall. He turned to Lyra, his hand reaching out to gently rest on her shoulder. "Lyra Thorne, once scorned, once confined, is the true guardian of this realm. Her tears, once thought a sign of madness, are now sacred. They are the purest manifestation of a divine gift that averted our utter ruin." He looked back at his court, his gaze sweeping over each person. "From this day forward, she is not merely a prophetess. She is my most trusted advisor, the voice of foresight, the heart of our vigilance." A ripple went through the court, a mix of awe and trepidation. The old prejudices, the whispered rumors, crumbled in the face of the king's absolute conviction and the undeniable evidence of the shadow blight tree, visible through the palace windows. Lyra felt a warmth spread through her chest. It was not triumph, not vengeance, but a deep, abiding peace. Her path had been hard, fraught with pain and isolation, but it had led her here to a place of acceptance and purpose. Her tears, once a source of humiliation and fear, were now revered. Her gift, once a burden, was now a strength. In the days that followed, the palace began to heal, though the scars remained. The shadow blight tree in the courtyard stood as a constant, stark reminder of the peril they had faced. Its gnarled branches, dark leaves, and aura of ancient sorrow were impossible to ignore. Many spoke of removing it, of cleansing the courtyard of such a disturbing presence, but Alaric refused. "Let it stand," he had said, his voice firm. "Let it remind us all of the price of blindness and the power of truth, however uncomfortable." Lyra found her place by Alaric's side, her visions now sought out, her words listened to with solemn respect. She still saw the future, sometimes in flashes, sometimes in the quiet introspection of her heart, and sometimes still in the shimmering depths of her crystalline tears. But the terror that had once accompanied her gift had lessened. She no longer fought against it. She embraced it, understood it as an integral part of who she was. The isolation had receded, replaced by a profound connection to Alaric and to the kingdom she served. One evening, Lyra stood with Alaric in the high windows overlooking the courtyard. The moon cast long, eerie shadows from the shadow blight tree, its dark silhouette stark against the night sky. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and the distant murmur of the palace. Lyra leaned her head against Alaric's shoulder, a profound sense of calm settling over her. The turmoil of the past months, the years of misunderstanding, finally found their quiet resolution. Her heart, once so burdened by unshared visions and unspoken pain, finally found its peace. The shadow blight tree remained a dark, silent sentinel, forever etched into the heart of the obsidian palace, a symbol of the averted doom and the enduring strength of truth. What would you have done? One line in the comments. Let's argue it out together. Where did the story catch you? Which scene made you stop and think? A small like is a small move, but it's a big support for this channel. See you in the next story. Subscribe so you don't miss it.